If you are a VC that invests in cutting-edge technology, but your own systems are still stuck in the 90s, well, you've come to the right place. Hey, I'm Matthias, and I'm building Europe's #1 Notion consultancy. It's our job to make your job easier, and we do this by building optimized Notion workspaces and helpful automations, so that your deal flow becomes easy to manage, your world-class team doesn't have to waste hours on manual data entry, and so that you can finally escape that hamster wheel of countless admin tasks. In short, we help you get back to investing. We've already worked with a lot of asset managers, for example, Media or Xand, the VC behind funds for people like Kevin Hart and KSK. In this video, I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know to go from an empty page in Notion to a fully functioning operating system. It's a bit of a long video because I really go over everything. No jumping ahead. You can follow along step by step and build all of this yourself. Or if you don't have the time and want us to do this for you, well, then just let me know. My team and I would love to be of help here. But for now, back to the video. We've split it into 3 parts to make it easier to follow. First, we'll have a quick big picture overview of the thing that we're actually going to build, so you get an idea of how these different building blocks build towards it. Then, second, we're going to take a deep dive into the Notion setup, both the databases that you need to power the system and the dashboards to actually use it. And then last but not least, we're going to take a quick sneak peek at a few helpful automations that you can start to implement to make your life that much easier. Ready? Let's go. We have a central landing page for our team that allows everyone to quickly dive into the specific funds, right? See the most recent deals that have entered the deal flow, and of course, jump into any active projects. If you look, for example, at a specific fund, we can see, okay, these are the companies that are in our portfolio here. These are the LPs that have invested. And in previous stages, right, we can see, okay, these are the deals that we need to investigate for this one. We can also, right, as individual contributors, see everything that is assigned to us, whether that's tasks, deals, project, but any moving piece in the system will have a way to be tied back to us. So everyone has this single source of truth for their setup. And we have, of course, a way to manage our deal flow, right? From quick insights analytics over the ability to see, okay, these are the last deals that we have, to adding them quickly to your own task list, right? Setting up meetings, tasks, and everything around it. So how do you actually build this? When designing any advanced system in Notion, we need to borrow some best practices from software development. A great Notion workspace has a scalable backend and an intuitive frontend. The backend is your data infrastructure. So all the databases that will capture all the important information that you need to run your VC firm. The front end, on the other hand, is how you're going to interact with all of that information. Sounds a bit complicated and abstract? Well, no worries. It will become clear in a second. So let's go ahead and start building this out in Notion. When building out any database system in Notion, your first thought should always be, what kind of information do I actually need to track? And this will very much depend on how you want to run your fund, but there are certain general databases which will probably make sense in this situation. And I started to list some of them out just to show you how to think about them. In terms of VC-specific databases, we probably need a way to track your deals or investment opportunities, your current portfolio, the different funds that you're running, then in sort of like a general CRM functionality, companies and contacts, your LPs, and then sort of like to illustrate a point I'm talking about that in a second, due diligence. After that, you also then have general databases, right, which will be encountered in pretty much any company setup. But of course, they're relevant here as well. Tasks and projects for your project management, docs and meetings for your knowledge management, and then updates and team directory as 2 supportive databases. The idea being that you want to figure out what are all the different, data points that are flowing through your company that you need to track and make sense of when it comes to optimizing your day-to-day workflows. You can either create your own list, right? Go sort of through things that you think are relevant, or what I would recommend, right? If this is the first time you're setting up something like this, go with this default list that I have here for you, and then think about, are there 1 or 2 extra things that you want to add, but also don't overdo it, right? This is a great starting point for it. And the beauty of it is that this is a very modular system, so you can always build on it later down the line. Once you have that list of databases, you want to go through every database and figure out, okay, what is the information that I actually need to track on here, right? Let's take the example of tasks. In the task database, you of course have, well, the actual task, but what meta information needs to be in the system. For example, for a task, we need to know who is responsible for this, right? So the owner of a task. We need to know what is the due date for this task. We need to know the status, right? When is it supposed to happen? And then probably we need to know the context, right? And with context, we could mean the project it belongs to, right? Or maybe the portfolio company it belongs to, or the deal, right? These are probably like the main elements that you will have tasks for in your list, and then you might make sure that you can assign it to the corresponding entity. Let's take another example. For contacts, well, we definitely need the contact itself, right? That's sort of the given on it. But the other information that we might care about is, for example, the email, maybe the phone number, the location might be relevant, the LinkedIn profile, the company, right, that this contact belongs to, maybe also an industry. And then probably, since this is a generics contact database where we might have like a lot of different type of contacts in there, the type, right? Is this contact a potential investor? Is this a potential founder, right? Are we actually keeping track of to further break down our CRM? Now, when going through this exercise, the biggest mistake that you can make is to create too many properties. When you are in Notion and you start building out these systems, you often have this moment where you're like, okay, I can start to track everything. So you create, 90 different properties to capture every potential angle around, like a different entry. And then later you realize, well, if this data isn't filled, right, then it doesn't do anything for me. And maybe even if it's filled, it might be completely useless in 99% of use cases and only sometimes be very tangibly relevant for a workflow. So to get started, my recommendation is to keep it to sort of the minimum viable properties, the minimum viable information that you need to work with that individual entry, right? What do you need to absolutely know about a contact so it makes sense in your CRM? What do you need to absolutely track about a task in your project management system so that nothing falls through the cracks? And then start with that. You can always later very easily add more properties to add more complexity. Also, once your team is getting used to the system, right, there will be a lot of more opportunities where people say, well, can we start, tracking this because it would help me do Y? These are then the moments to listen for, but in the beginning, keep it better simple. Now, I went ahead and filled this out for the whole list. And before we now dive into building these databases, let me just point out a few patterns. First, you might notice that we will have on pretty much every database an owner property. And that's because Notion is amazing at building systems of accountability. In fact, as a rule of thumb, I would say pretty much every database that you set up in Notion should have always an owner property to indicate who is responsible for that. And this owner property should be set to only allow one person, because if everyone is responsible, then no one is responsible. So it's very important, right, that you have a clear, single responsible person for every entry. Another thing that you might notice is that a lot of these properties database have status properties, right, that allow us to build these pipelines to move people through. For example, the deals, right, have their own deal stages. The portfolio ones will have their own status property to indicate where they are in the life cycle. Funds, same game here. And another element is then that a lot of these databases are related among each other, right? I've showed you earlier this flowchart of how all the databases tie in together. And this is how we're going to build this out. And one thing to keep in mind there, right, is that we want to avoid double data entry. So if we have certain information already on the contacts database, then there's no need to add it again elsewhere. So for example, a deal doesn't need an email, right, for the person that we reach, because we will get that from the contact. Same for example, an LP, right? The LP will also be related to our contacts, so we can get all that core person data from that property. But enough of the theory now. Let's dive into the actual building part and start creating these databases so you see how it all comes together in action. Now, in order to create your very first database, you can simply press enter once or twice here at the top of the page and then type /database. And then we will create an inline database. Now, very importantly, we only do this in the initial phase of it, where we build out the whole system. Later, we will turn all these databases into their own individual pages and move them into a backend so that our workspace is very clear and organized. But in particular for this like initial build out, it's helpful to have all the databases on one page, one below the other, because you might have to jump back and forth quite a bit. Often, as you build out these systems, you will remember that you actually forgot to add a property on contacts, for example, when you come to your company's database, and then it's just much easier than having to swap between different pages. So just keep in mind, this is not how the final system will look like, but for now, it's exactly what we need. So the first one that we want to set up is actually our funds database, because this will be a very central building block. So we're going to click on new empty database here, and we're going to build this one from scratch. And I'm going to show you 2 shortcuts afterwards to set up databases much quicker once you've gone through this initial prep work. So let's go back to our fund one, right, and just pull this up here to see, okay, what is it that we want to add here? First things first, we want an owner property. So let's click on plus, right? Let's look for the person property. It's here. And then let's just type owner as a name and then add that person property to it. Perfect. You see now, right, if we have sort of like our first fund, we can now click in here and we can assign people from our company, from our workspace as the owner. One note, in general, what I would recommend to do is that you, for properties, never leave the default icon. And instead assign an icon that makes it very clear what this property is. And then you use the same icon across all databases for the same type, right? So you see we have owner databases everywhere. So we'll use always the same icon, which makes it much easier to have this consistent visual design language, particularly when you have big databases. It will make it much easier to quickly scan information. So let's just look for the other person option. And since this is an individual person, right, I quite like this one, which makes it very clear, okay, this is one person only. Speaking of one person, if you click on this database and then on edit property, you will see that you have certain options. And that's a general design pattern in Notion. Whenever you add a property, you want to quickly check what are the options that I can set here, just to be sure that you have everything set up correctly. In this case, what we want is a limit of 1, right? Because there's always only be one person who is responsible for it. And then we also want to set a default, right? Because no entry should ever be without an owner. So to make sure that this is always filled, we're going to click on default and say created by, which means now I'm in there already. And whenever a new entry is added, by default, there's one person already in, and then you can assign it to someone else very easily, but nothing will fall through the cracks. So what else do we need? We need a vintage here, right? So vintage year, and then select the date property. Here, let's maybe go with the play icon to indicate that this is where things have started. We need the font size, right? So font size. This will be a number property. Over number property, right? If we click over here, for example, we can see, okay, we can change the type of number, we can change the decimals. I'm happy with this one for now, right? Size, let's actually maybe use the weight for this one. And for the vintage year, date property, same game here as well, right? All the presettings look pretty good to me, but if you could change, right, the date format if you wanted it differently. And then we have committed capital and deployed capital. Now, interestingly, both of those will be different type of properties, and special ones, for which we need some of the other databases, but we can already go ahead and create these as placeholders if we want. So let's add committed capital as a text property in a placeholder, and let's add deployed capital as a placeholder text. Then target sectors, this we can already fully add. Let's click on plus. Whenever we want to be able to select something, our options in Notion are either the select property or the multi-select. Depends on whether you have one or several options. Now, since we have target sectors, right, plural, we probably want to be able to select from a list of multiple options. So let's go for this, and let's call this target sectors. Here, maybe take a construction, like a crane, right? Might be a nice one for the sector. And then let's add the fund status. Before I add the status though, one quick side note. You might have caught me adding a property first. So for example, I can also click on status, then it adds it with the default name, but then you can always click on an entry, right, again, and then rename it to something else. So if we wanted to call this fund status, right, we could. And here we see if we understate this property, Notion by default will give us always these 3 not started, in progress, and done, but we can now modify them. So for the fund status, right, this would probably be the first status would be planning, right? Then in progress, we probably need several. We might be raising capital, right? We might be deploying or investing, right? Actively investing. And then we might have also managing stage. We can reorder them in whatever order we want. We can also change the colors, right? Raising might be yellow, actively investing blue, okay. Managing might be purple. And then for done, let's call this closed. And this is the general idea, right, of how you can create your own pipelines in these, for these status properties. And there you have it. Our first database is pretty much already done, right? For now, we will probably add a few more properties as we go and, build out the rest of the system. But this looks pretty good. What we can do now, quickly, before we move on to the next, is maybe reorder the properties. We can do so by simply dragging them in whatever order we want, right? The status, we might actually want to see this in the very front of the database. Alternatively, we can always click on settings here and then on property visibility. And that allows you also to sort of like move these things around a bit quicker than otherwise. But yeah, this is a pretty good starting point. So now let's move on to our deals database and look at a shortcut to creating this. Now, since we already went through the hard work of defining the properties that we want on this, let's just quickly copy this for now and then go again here, right? And type again /database. And this time use the build with AI option. Now, this is only available if you have Notion AI active on your workspace, but can really help shorten your execution time. So in this case, we can now describe what kind of database we want. And what we want is, please build us a database to track deals / opportunities for VC firm. Use the following properties. And then we can paste what we already worked on. Now, this pasting is really important. If you just ask it to build you a database for, then as always with AI, right, it will go off and think what's best. And the general rule of garbage in, garbage out applies here as well. Now, that doesn't mean it's always bad to do this, right? There might be situations when you have no idea what properties you might want to track, and then it's nice for a first idea. But most of the time, right, I would really recommend to be very conscious about what properties do you actually need, and start with that, and then tell AI what it should do. So we're going to hit enter here, and now we can watch it build this. And how closely it adheres to the prompt varies sometimes a bit, right? Sometimes it's exactly what you need rather than just follows it to the T. Sometimes it deviates a bit and adds more properties or it forgets something, but still it should get you 80% of the way there. It's also quite good at already assigning icons and building some views. We'll get to that in a second. So it's definitely will shorten your development time, but just keep in mind that you definitely want to check the output, right, to make sure it looks correct. So here it has set something up for us, and it also suggested some additional properties for us, right? So for example, deal nodes. Now I would put this into the description, but if we wanted a separate one, we could now just turn this on here, right? We see a little preview of this database here, and then when we're happy with it, right, we can click on continue. Here, we also see that we have some options for additional views, but again, we'll touch on that in a second. So for now, we're just going to ignore this, click on done, and then we see with just a few clicks, we have our second database here. Now, this won't be perfect, right? So let's go through it and double check it. First, owner property, generally good, but what did we say? We always want this icon. So let's click in there. Let's swap the icon to our default owner icon. And let's make sure, right, that the limit is set to one person and the default is created by. Still quicker than doing it ourselves, but right, this step is important. For company, it just add a simple text property. That's fine, right? This will be a placeholder. We will create our own company database later and then relate it. So we can ignore this for now. Deal stage, let's see whether it actually got the ones that we wanted, right? So I believe for deal stages, let's pull this up to the top. We had sourced, initial review. Perfect, I got that. Deep dive, IC prep, IC decision, term sheet, due diligence, and closing. Perfect, that's pretty impressive, right? That it stuck to all of them. When I look at this now, I realize one thing that I forgot, right? Let's also add a second completed stage which will be rejected, right? So this would be a red colored one. And then we probably want to change one of the due diligence colors to something else. Maybe due diligence is instead like a purple or like an orange, maybe something that we haven't used there. Deep dive, okay, that's fine, right? We might want to align them a bit better, but in general, that's pretty good. Initial review is also in progress though, right? So let's do this and then click out of it. But pretty nice. That was much quicker than doing from scratch. Industry, it already created a select property and gave us a few options, so that's great. Although you will probably want to go in there, right, and adjust this to the industries that you invest in. Target investments, that looks good. Revenue, that also looks good, right? The fund, now here, it just made something up, right? And it's a text property. But that doesn't matter because now we can actually, since we have funds already set up, create our first advanced property. To do this, let's go in and let's change this fund property from a text property to a relation. So now to do this, let's click on fund, and let's say change type, and let's pick here the relation option. A relation allows you to connect one database to another and basically tell Notion that an entry in database A has something to do with an entry in database B. What that relation is, right, that's up to you to define, but this connection is so important. So in our case, we want to be able to relate this to our funds database. So this is what I'm going to select, right, funds. And here, what we want to do is we want to turn on two-way relation, which means that both on the fund database, it will show an option to select a deal, and on the deals database, it will give us an option to connect to the fund, which is 99% of the time the sort of default that you want. So let's click on add relation and see what happens. First, we notice that the text disappears that was in here. We also get this new icon, which is the default relation icon. We're going to replace this in a second. And you see on funds, we have now also this new property deals. And if I click in here, I'll see all my options from deals there, right? And if I click into here, into the fund, I see all my fund options. And I can start linking them. So I could say, right, this one belongs to the first fund, and we see it pops up here. And this one also belongs to the first fund and will pop up here as well. So that's kind of the base idea of how to create relations in Notion. And we'll touch on a lot more use cases for this, but it's one of the most fundamental important principles when building advanced Notion systems. Now, it might seem minor right now, but we need to do something about the icon here again, because this is the default relation icon. We will have dozens of relations all over the place, and we can't have them all look the same. Instead, the golden rule is when you create a relation to another database, it should by default always have the main icon, quote unquote, of that other database. So what is the default icon for a fund? Well, we haven't set one yet. So in this case, let's actually just go with this circle with a dot. I like this as sort of like a neutral one. And then for a deal opportunity here, we could go with maybe the rocket, right, to indicate, okay, this is a cool opportunity. So whenever in the future, right, we reference deals anywhere, it will have a rocket. Whenever we mention funds anywhere, it will have this. And again, I'll touch on a few more use cases for this, but it will make it much easier to quickly identify what is what later down the line. Now, contacts will also be a relation, but we haven't set up the database, so we can skip that for now. Description is a text property. This is perfect. It's already pre-filled with sample data. One quick note, right? If I right-click this, there's this option to wrap text in view, right? Which basically makes it span, which is particularly useful for longer text properties. It will depend on the specific way that you want to see the data, right? Whether this is something that you want to have or not. We'll talk about different view options in a moment, but just as a quick side note, the thesis, it also took, whoops, where did it actually go? I think I hid it by accident, so let's bring this back, yes. So whenever you can hide properties, again, something we'll touch on in a moment, you can always bring them back by clicking on the settings and then property visibility. For thesis, it added a text property, but actually what I wanted here is a select, because I wanted an option to select sort of like if you have like 2 or 3 core investment theses, right, and you want to be able to track, okay, which deal fits in which one, I think a select property is nice. So in order to change this, I'm actually going to delete the content here quickly. And then I'm going to say change type, please give me a select property. And then for my thesis, right, I can just create some options. So thesis 1, thesis 2, and thesis 3. They behave very similar to the way that a status property behaves. You can click on edit, right, and here you can now change the options. You can change the color if you wanted to, right, maybe yellow, green, and purple. And then have an easy option, right, to select one, and will always be one on the other thesis. If you would like to be able to assign several, remember, multi-select is your friend. Business model, let's leave the text one. Initially, I actually thought this should be a select one as well. So I have to select, is it a marketplace, right, is this a SaaS company? But depending on what kind of companies you invest in, you might not need this, right? If you just invest in SaaS, then having this as a separate property is redundant because it gives you information that you don't need. So in this case, maybe a free text to just expand a little bit on it might be nice. Reason to reject. Here, I definitely want like a select property. So let's switch this to select. And let's say, for example, business model not convincing, or valuation too high. Whatever the typical reasons are, right? If you want to track them later, why do you actually reject deals? You can generate some interesting dashboards based on this. Deal notes is fine as a text property. And yeah, now we're done with our biggest database probably in the system, and much quicker thanks to the help of AI. Now, as promised, a second way to speed up the creation process, and that is through other AI tools and the MCP. If you don't know, MCP stands for Model Context Protocol, and it's basically a handbook for other AI tools like Claude or ChatGPT on how to control the Notion API. So instead of using Notion AI to do this, right, we can also tell an AI tool like Claude to please generate a database for us. Right here I have my instruction in there. Please set up a database named portfolio. I've copied the instructions again on the properties in there to make sure it knows exactly what to do. And I can hit enter and will maybe ask me to confirm a security setting. Sometimes when we do this for the first time, it's necessary. And then it will go ahead and create that database. And then we can look on our actual Notion page, right? Will probably pop up here at the bottom in a moment with all the properties, hopefully. And it's one additional way, right, of how you can just speed up this process for your build steps. If you want to know exactly how to set this up, I'll leave a link for this in the description, but these tools make it easier all the time. So probably by the time that you watch this, there's already an easier way where you can just go through the settings here, right, to do this. But now here it is, right, we have our database. It is here. You see actually it was created as its own page. So what we're going to do is we're going to just pull this up to our other databases. And then in order to be able to easily go through the properties, right, and see what we have there and what we need to change, we're going to turn it into an inline database. We'll do this by clicking on the 6 dots here and then saying turn into inline database. And here it is, right, our portfolio database. And let's check here for the properties, how good of a job Claude did versus Notion AI. So we see we have our status property. Let's pull this to the beginning. But the first thing we notice already, right, status is a select property. It's not the correct status property. So again, right, just as with Notion AI, we need to go through it, make sure it is all correct. So let's actually add Acme in here as an option. Let's then go in here, right, say change this property to a status property. What are the statuses for a portfolio that we want? Well, we have sort of like not started that we can delete, right? This will not be necessary, so let's delete it. We will have active, that's perfect. Let's set this as the default. So anything in here, right, will always be on active. And make sure that this is our sort of in progress step. Exited, that's good. Written off, let's add both of these to the complete step. Let's add and delete this default done. And then we need sort of like a to-do option, right? If we want to actually, we can also skip it altogether. Maybe makes sense because the second something is a portfolio company, right? It will probably be an active in progress one. Let's just delete this last option here and then go with these 3 options, right? Maybe we want to swap the colors around to make sure that green is always like a done step. But otherwise, this looks good. Let's keep going. Board seat for checkbox. Yes, this makes sense. Company, placeholder database. So we don't have our company database just yet. Current valuation, exit date, exit return, all good. Fund, nice. It set up that relation property, right? This is one thing that Claude and ChatGPT can already do through the MCP, what Notion AI currently won't be able to do. So particularly as you go later down the list, right, you want to make sure your databases are correctly related. This is a benefit, but of course we need to make sure we have the correct icon here. So let's swap fund icon out for this one. Let's also make sure that this is a two-way relation. Yeah, perfect, that's nice. So here again, right, we can select now that this is part of our first fund as a company. We have our initial investment date, owner, ownership. All looks good, right? Owner again, we need to go in, change that property to this one, make sure we have our limit set to 1 and the default for created by. But otherwise, again, right, just as with Notion AI, a quick way to speed up the database creation process. All right, so I've asked AI to create also a bunch of other databases for us based on our instructions and what we initially laid out here, just to speed up the process. But now let's go through them and make sure everything is set up the right way. First up, companies. This will be a very central part of our CRM, so let's make sure it's correctly connected. We had both on deals and portfolio placeholders for this, right? So let's make sure they are correctly connected. Here, company, let's change this from this text property to relation. We want to relate it to companies both ways. Yes, please add a relation, and then as the icon, right, let's add maybe the factory to indicate company always. And on the companies database, right, let's go in here, look for deals, and make sure deals is correctly associated with a rocket. Same game for portfolio, and we can do this from both sides. So we could also, if we don't have a placeholder here, I think I accidentally deleted it, you could also do it from companies, right? Let's click on here, create a new property called portfolio, make this a relation to the portfolio database, two-way and relation. And same game here, right? Make sure that for portfolio, let's actually, I think, use a briefcase. I don't think we have an icon for this yet. And then on the other way, from portfolio to the companies, let's make sure we have the factory here again. And you see how this is starting to come together with our interconnected entries. Now, the reason actually why we have companies as a separate entry and that we relate both from portfolio and from deals to it is that this separate companies database is a great place to just have all the general information that will be relevant. Things like the location, right? The contact, and so on and so on. And we will build later a smart automation so that if you have a company, right, then it goes sort of through a pipeline of, okay, first it's a normal company, then it becomes a deal or an opportunity, and then it becomes a portfolio that sort of like automatically moves through this and automatically creates entries in these other databases, right? So you don't have to do this manually, but you always have this track record back. Oh, it's something for the last part of the video, right, when we build automations, but just sort of to explain this reasoning, right? Why we have sort of like 3 databases here for what in the end is all ultimately a company. Going through this further, we see that AI messed up a bit and added 2 contacts here, but no worries, we're just going to delete this contact text property, and then we're going to take this relation, which is already set up to the next database here, and going to rename this, right? So this will be contacts. For that, we can pick a person property, right? Whichever we like, maybe the 2 users. And then here we make sure that the relation on the way back will be with the correct icon of using the company ones. So now on company, right, let's just say we have here Apple Inc. We can add a contact here. We have our location. Currently is a free text property. If you want to switch this to a select and enforce always the same type, we could, but it's fairly flexible. On our owner, right, make our usual changes of adding this user icon, setting the limit to 1 person and the default to created by. Type is fine, right? We have a few options for companies in here. We might also actually, instead of having these options, maybe just change this to more like, is this actually, is it a vendor that we talk to? Is this a potential target company? Depends really how you're gonna slice and dice your, CRM. Website, that makes sense. Portfolio, right? This is what we already set up. So let's just fill this with a bit of sample data. For the location, right, let's just input Germany for a second. And then for contacts, one of the cool things with these databases is that we can add them from both sides, right? So we could add a contact here and link it, but we can also do it here, right? So if we want to add Tim Cook, right, he doesn't exist yet, but we can create a new entry, and now you see he pops up here. It won't be the final interface, of course, right? This is very rudimentary in the backend, but you kind of see like how things are coming together there. So now that we have the companies set up, right, on contacts, let's double check this database. Email, perfect. Industry as a select property, exactly what we want. LinkedIn, and then location, right, again, as a current text property would probably make sense, actually, now that I think about it, to change this to a select just to make it easier comparable. One thing that you see is that if I had text already in there, it will turn this into a select option. So let's do this on both sides. Both of them can be select properties. Here we go. Owner, right? Also here, perfect. Go through the same rule again, making this a 1 person created by default. Phone number. And then we have already here relation to LPs and to meetings, sort of like a preview of what will come in a moment. So moving on again, right? Let's go through LPs. Committed date, committed fund. That's perfect. Contact person. We'll swap that out, right? This will be this icon. Otherwise, that looks good. And then on LPs, we can figure out what will be our person icon for them. Maybe for LPs, we do the walking person. That's a nice one, right? Let's call this, do this. And the idea here is the same as with companies, right? Of course, an LP is also a contact, but by separating them in 2 databases, we can make sure that we have the general contact information of them all in this one single CRM database, and then the dedicated specific information about what makes them an LP in here. And again, while we can add an automation later to move a contact very quickly into the LP database so that we have no problem whatsoever there, right, to keep track of all these connections. Now there's one last thing that AI didn't get quite right about LPs, and that's this committed to fund, right? It made this a text property, but actually what I want here is I want to be able to connect an LP to a fund. So we're going to change the type, right? It will be a relation and will be a relation from the LP to our fund, right? Let's search for this database. Here it is, two-way relation, right? Add a relation, make sure here, right, since it relates to fund, that we have this icon. And then we can go all the way up, right, to our very first database that we set up here. And we see now we have also LPs. So for LPs, we're going to change this into our running person. And then our portfolio company, right, portfolio, we add and update this for our icon with the briefcase. Now, I know this was a lot, so let's just take an opportunity to quickly zoom out and look at what we actually built. We kind of built the VC specific part of this operating system in Notion. We have our funds, and our funds have LPs, and they have portfolio companies. Our portfolio companies spring from a deal, right, and are linked to a company. And of course, the deal, I forgot it's actually here to visualize, right, is also linked to a company. So this is sort of like, this has the general information about any type of company, and it can be then become a portfolio company or a deal. We also have contacts, which just like basically everything links to contacts in some way, shape or form, because at an LP, at a portfolio company, at a just generic company, and at a deal opportunity, we will always have a contact person. So, looking at it like this, it hopefully becomes a bit clearer what it is that we actually built here in Notion. And on the Notion side, right, it's really just about making sure that every single one of these entries has all the database properties that you need, and then it has the relations to the other databases that are relevant. Now, one relation that we haven't created yet, but which we probably should create just to be a bit more disciplined with it, is to make sure that also LPs, right? LPs will probably be companies as well, right? So here we would need to add this relation at the very end to, in the same way as we do with contacts, right? Have these companies be connected to everything, just track the general information. But again, here's also where your preference comes in, right? If you look at this and say like, actually, I don't need this for LPs, well, the world is yours, right? Like this is your Notion system. You can just as easily skip this part. You can make sure this data model works for your specific use case. This is just the starting point that I would recommend. Now, we're not quite done with our database architecture, of course, just yet. Besides the VC specific elements of it, we of course also have the general databases, which will be present in pretty much any company setup. So let's literally zoom out a little bit and look at those, right? What we're still missing are projects and tasks as the core project management elements, and then meetings and docs as two very essential knowledge management elements. Now for these, the relation will look much simpler, right? We have projects at the top, and then projects can have meetings, projects can have tasks, and projects can have documents. And then depending on how far you want to take it, right, you might want to be able to have tasks sort of like related to meetings, so you can track in which meetings did you discuss which tasks. And you might want to be able to link also docs to tasks if you have specific standard operating procedures, right? And you want to sort of like link, okay, here's how you do it to a task. And this sits for now a little bit isolated and next to the other system, but the common connector ultimately, right, will be docs and tasks, because docs and tasks and maybe meetings, they can of course also be related to all these other elements. Again, it comes then down to how do you actually want to create it for your system. But in general, you want to think about, okay, where will things become relevant? To keep this in the beginning out a bit simpler, not to over-engineer it too much, let's assume for meetings, we want to be able to track which of the contacts were in a meeting. And then we will have meetings for portfolio companies and for deal opportunities. Tasks can also be associated other than to a project, to a portfolio company or for a deal. And same with docs, right? Docs can be linked to a deal or portfolio. And again, right, you can expand this later on as you want, but there's a pretty good starting point. And then you see we have sort of these two databases running around here on the outside, updates and a team directory. Both of those are pretty much quality of life databases, right? Updates is for a very specific kind of workflow that I want to walk you through when we start building out the UI and the interface. And team directory is just a nice to have thing, right? To keep track on who's actually, in your company, but it's not technically needed for the sort of core workflow here. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good representation of what we need. So now let's ask AI to create also, based on our instructions, property databases for projects, tasks, docs, and meetings. Those will be a bit more simple. And then we're pretty much done with the backend except for one crucial step. All right, so here are our tasks, projects, docs, and meetings, right? With just some very basic elemental properties for tasks. We want, of course, the status of the task, the owner, and the due date. And now we add the relations, right? So we'll have an option to link this to a project. For this, we will link it to our projects database that is in here. Here we go. And if you're ever like doubtful about which project database it is, right, you will always get this like little, like breadcrumbs in your workspace in case you have a lot of databases like me. But ideally, right, if you're in your workspace, you should only see one project database because everything shouldn't be in one and the same. So turn on two-way relation, add that. Make sure for projects, let's actually maybe add this as our standard icon here. And for tasks, we can add as our default icon the checkbox. Tasks should also be related, right? What did we say? To deals and to portfolios. So let's add deal as a relation, right? And pick here deals database. Notion for VC, perfect, two-way relation. That will be tasks. Here again, right? This will be the rocket as our icon. And we have that. And then the last property relation here would be the relation to our portfolio. So let's add this as well. And then after we've done this, let's talk about one little trick here that is good to keep in mind. And that is, in this situation, right, a task could be linked to either one of those three: a project, a deal, or a portfolio. And that, of course, means if we display it later in different settings, it might be quite hard to know what this task is actually about. Now, to help us with this in these situations where we have an entry that could have one of several parents, we can create a property that sort of just aggregates it. Now, in order to do this, what we're going to do is click on plus, and we're going to add our first formula property, another really fun and little advanced trick. And we're going to call this, let's call this context, right? And let's add a formula property. Let's here for the context, maybe just add a magnifying glass or something like that. And click into edit property and then edit formula. And what we can do now is we can say, okay, depending on whether project, deal, or portfolio is filled, show me that filled entry. There are a few approaches. Now, ideally, you probably want to make sure that a task either belongs to a portfolio or a deal or a project, right? So it's sort of like very specific. And in this case, what we can do is we can write a simple if statement where you can say, okay, if project is filled, then give me project. Otherwise, if deal is filled, give me deal. And otherwise, if portfolio is filled, give me portfolio. Now, I'm moving quite fast here with this formula because this is not a video meant to be a deep dive into that, right? You can sort of just copy what I'm writing here and duplicate it. And then if you want to dive deeper into how to create Notion formulas, I have a full masterclass for this, link below down in the description. For now, let's just click on done and see how this works. If I now add a new task, like sample task, and we go in here and we say, okay, this is linked to, let's actually create a project, right? Sample project, we can do it right from here. Create this, right? We have a new entry here. We see context shows me sample project. Perfect. But if I now have a deal task, and in this deal task, I will link it to a deal, right? Let's say to Tech Fusion, we see Tech Fusion here. And this will allow us, right, later when we build this interface to make sure that there's one property that just displays, okay, this is why this task matters, right? This is why we do this. And yet at the background still contain these several relations to different databases to have very granular control over it. Perfect. So much for tasks. Let's move on to projects. And here we have another opportunity for a formula, and this time for the progress formula. Now, there are a few different ways to get the progress of a project, right? We can write a formula to look at all the tasks and see how many of them are checked, or we can actually use a rollup. This is another advanced property that we haven't talked about yet, but it's great to keep it in mind. Let's actually take a simpler example first. I'm just thinking of this before we move to this formula application. Let's have a look at contacts and companies. Let's say, right, on the company database, we want to show the contact email for the company. And we have that information here, right? For Tim Cook, we have sort of like tim@apple.com. That's his email. So we don't really want to have a separate property here on companies again, right, where we just enter the same information. We'd rather just look up the information based on the contact and display it here. In order to do this, let's add a new property here. Let's click on plus and let's pick, let's say, sort of like contact email. And as the option, let's choose rollup. And then let's quickly change this, right, to our @ symbol and make sure that here we go into a relation and we set it up now. The first thing that, a rollup. The first thing that a rollup always needs is a relation. A rollup always works in tandem with it. A relation tells Notion these two entries are connected. A rollup tells Notion from this connection, get me some information, kind of like a VLOOKUP in Excel. So here, let's say as our relation, we will pick the contacts relation. Then we can check what is the target, what information do we want to display here, and how do we want to display it. Let's leave it actually at name and origin, and we see it just like repeats the name, right? Because this is not helpful. So let's click in here and change name, and you see the options that we get are the properties on the contacts database, right? From the relation that we're looking at. Let's say, okay, I want to grab the email, and show origin is still what I want. And now we see, okay, we pull in the contact email here from Tim Cook, and if we added the second contact, right? If we went in here, right, and said, okay, I also want Steve Jobs. Let's create him as a new contact. And for Steve, let's say Steve at apple.com, right? We then now see in our rollup, we will get both the contact email addresses listed here. So that's sort of like the main use case for rollups. But in some situations, like here for projects, we can also use them to calculate the progress. And to do so, we're going to click on here and we change this first to actually a rollup property. Then we're going to say, okay, please, for the progress, and actually let's get like a little chart icon here. For the progress, let's make sure that we look at our task relation. From tasks, I care about the status. And for calculation, don't show me the origin, because I don't care right about it showing not started. Instead, I want you to go in and give me the percent per group that is completed. Right, currently it is at 0%, but if I now take the sample task and check it off, it will be at 100%. And if we added another sort of like third task, right, and if we related it to this same sample project, we will go down to 50% because half the tasks are done, half aren't. That's pretty neat, but let's make it a bit nicer visually. So let's click on here again. Let's say edit property, and let's say here, right, I would like to show this actually as a bar. And now we see, right, that we get next to our number property of 50%, this neat little bar chart that indicates that, right, if I sort of had like another task, and if we linked this to our project as well, we see now, right, that we are at 33%. And the more we check off, right, the further our progress bar, keeps going. Again, there are a bunch of ways to do this. You could also do this with the formula, but in particular, if you're a beginner, it's a bit easier to do it through a rollup. Now for docs and meetings, the drill will be the same, right? We will create the same relations to projects, to deals and portfolio companies. So I don't want to bore you with the same walkthrough again. Just one quick shout out or like notice on one thing. For meetings, you see that I've created two attendees properties. And that is so that when we create a meeting, we have one option A to add our internal people, right, through a Notion person property. And then we have the external property to add people from our contacts database. And that allows us, right, to bridge the gap between Notion's internal system and person properties and the external ones that we meet with them, but they are not in our system. So just as a quick side note, right, this is sort of like the only last outlier in for like docs and meetings. Everything else works exactly the same as you've seen before. Now, yeah, with this setup, we have a lot of databases to work with. We have pretty much all the business intelligence that we need. There's just this one last step that I was referring to, right, that we need to set up here before we move on to building the actual interface, and that are views, right? Notion database views are what really is going to allow us to build the rest of the system out much quicker. I'm going to explain in a second why that's the case. But first, what actually is a database view? Well, a database view in Notion is a way of slicing and dicing the information in a database. Let's take a look at tasks, for example, right? Right now we see all our tasks here, and that's not the best way to do it. We probably want to have some way, right, to only show certain tasks, hide others, and not have to deal with all that information at once. Also, not all properties might always be relevant. So in order to do this, what we want to do is set up specific views for specific scenarios. For example, we might want a view with all our overdue tasks. We might want a view with all our open tasks. We might want to, particular team environment, right, all the open tasks that are assigned to me. So in order to create them, we're going to click on this little plus button here and then start creating our first views. Now, I can't click on here because I might or might not leak some new Notion database views, but after you click on here, you will get the option to select a specific type of a database. We're first going to go with a table view, right? Sort of the same type of view as we have it here, and then set that up specifically for the scenario of I want to see only open tasks assigned to me. All right, I created this first additional task view, right? My open tasks. You can rename this very easily, right? Give it also an icon, a different name. And now what we can do on here, right? It shows me right now the same thing as before, but I can now go ahead and set filters and sorts for only specific information. Let's go ahead, apply our first filter. I would recommend to always add an advanced filter. The only reason when you want to add a simple filter, which you get by clicking directly on a property, is if you want to be able for the user to directly change this. So for example, right, if you want to be able that the user can select the portfolio that this belongs to, you would add a simple filter, and this gives you this little drop down so someone can easily go in there and change it. But most of the time, we want to set general filters for our database, right? That should not just be easily changed by a user. So in that case, always go for the advanced option because it gives us a lot more options to play with. I'm going to click on that. And then we say, okay, what do we want to filter by? In this case, I want to filter by status, right? Wherever the status is not done, right? Those are the tasks that I want to show here. Pretty good, right? Now I see only the open tasks. And on top of that, I might only want to see open tasks assigned to me. So that's a second thing, right? But before we add this, let's actually take a look at this, right? Here we have a lot of the different properties. Maybe we actually want to hide this. Maybe here we only want to see context. So for that, let's click on settings, property visibility, and let's turn off project, deal, and portfolio, right? Which means we just have now this very simple, easy to grasp view of open tasks plus the context in which they are relevant. In order to now add to this view, right, the filter for me, I could just do it here, but actually I want these as separate views, right? I want one view where I have all my open tasks, and I want to have a second view where I have all open tasks just filtered for me personally. In order to do this, let's just click on here, and this time we can duplicate it so we don't have to build it again from scratch. And let's call this my tasks. And one thing that I like to do is for like these me views, right, that are showing all the items that are relevant for me, I always like to give them the star icon, again, right, for this visual clarity across the workspace. Now that we've set it up, we can click on filter, and we can say again, okay, here, please add as an additional filter that the owner contains, and then now me, right? You could select Matthias, but that would mean that on every view, it would always show Matthias's task. But by selecting the me filter, you make this dynamic, and whoever looks at this page will see the tasks assigned to them. So right now, that's me, right? But if Jill, who's in my team, right, looks at this, she will see currently no tasks because none of them are assigned to her. But I can assign now one to her, right? And that means the task assigned to her disappears. It's no longer assigned to me, but when she looks at this view, she will see it. Now, why is it so relevant that we set up these views at this point? As you might remember from earlier, right? These databases will live in a separate backend of our workspace. And most of the time, we will not visit the database itself to do work. Instead, we're going to build dashboards to interact with that information. So why not just build these views on the dashboard rather than here? Well, the reason for that is that all views that you build on the main instance of a database will become accessible as templates later on. Let me show you what I mean. We just quickly, pretend that we're navigating away. Let's create a new page somewhere, right? Let's call this our dashboard for whatever, right? And let's say we need a view of our tasks on here. We're going to add this, right? It's sort of like a bit of a jump ahead for later. We're going to say create link view of database. I'm going to look for my tasks database in my for my Notion for VC setup. And you see now, okay, I've pulled in that, and we have in general just this general table view, right, with all our properties visible. But I can pick also from views on tasks, which is this default view, but then also the open tasks, right, filtered for everything that is open, and my open tasks, filtered for only mine. So by setting it up once in the backend for all our different databases, right, these most important modular views, you'll make your life so much easier later down the line. Because if you need this my task view in 3 different places, you don't have to rebuild every single time. You build it once and you can deploy it everywhere. Let's take a look at 2 more examples here. First, on our funds database at the very top, right? The default again, right, is our table view that we have with all information, but maybe we want to actually have them in some situations as a gallery view. So I've already created this here. And this gallery view, right, again, just by clicking on the plus button and then choosing gallery. And here, what we basically get are then these big individual buttons. And this is great as navigation, right? We will see this later when we start building the interface. And that's why I prefer to have, in particular for these like high-level databases like funds, probably also deals and portfolio, always this gallery view present that allows us then to, basically have these buttons, right, to open more information about it. Now, we can make it a bit more interesting than just having this button. We can click on the settings and then on property visibility, and then make sure we show whatever information we care about when we want to see it in this context. So let's turn on the status property, right? So we see when this fund is, what status it is in, and then also the target sectors maybe, right? And then we have now a little bit of a bigger card, right? And can easily choose from there. We could now, of course, also layer filters again on top of this, right? So let's actually maybe, if we wanted to run, we could duplicate this and say, okay, I want to only see the active funds, but then we will always only have like a smaller number of funds. I think this is good. And instead, we could add just sort, right? So we will have the vintage here. So let's say this was something in terms of a date property, right? Let's say we start this fund on Jan 2025, and maybe then there's a second fund, right? Second fund, and that one, is like now more towards today. So somewhere around 1st of August. Maybe this is also already, managing, and here we are currently raising. And then what we can add to make sure that the second fund is always shown here, right? Which right now is just there coincidentally because it was the new entry. We can add a sort and say, okay, please always sort by vintage here, descending. And that way, right, we always get this order whenever we load in this view anywhere. Moving on to deals, right? On deals, as you notice, we already have views set up because here we used Notion AI to create a database. And if that's the case, Notion AI will try to give you a few sample views. And that's quite nice, right, to get a bit of inspiration of what's possible, and shows already one of my favorite views, in particular for these kind of longer pipelines like deals, which is this board view. So again, right, in order to create it, you would simply click on plus and then choose the board view. And then here, what you can see is we basically have this Kanban style board view that shows me all my different entries. So this is already quite nice, but the default settings that Notion AI shows here are not my preferred way to display these board views. So let's go into the settings and let's look at group. Right, we see here we're currently grouping by deal stage. That's perfect, but it only shows me stages where we have deals inside of it, and that's not what I want. So let's click on group, and then let's make sure we toggle off hide empty groups. And this means we now get our full pipeline view here, right? I'm also going to turn full width on this page just so we have a bit more real estate. Now we have larger databases. And we see now we go from source, initial view, deep dive, right, all the way to our closing and rejected ones. Those actually I would like to not show here because those lists will both go very, very long. So again, what I will do is I go to settings, group, and then I will turn both of them off, right? I will hide both rejected and closed, but then I will pin them, right? And pinning them will lead to them being here on the side, so I can always easily drag something in there, right? So let's say match a secure health platform, right? Let's say this is a closed deal, I can just drag it on top of here on a rejected one, and that way, right, the pipeline stays clear. I can easily move them to the entry where they belong, but we also don't have this like ever-growing, endless list of deals stacking up in rejected. Otherwise, these cards work pretty much exactly like the cards that we had up here, right? So we can turn on and off certain properties that we want to see. So in this case, right, we would go to property visibility, owner. I like that, right? That is probably very relevant. And you can just see, okay, what other information would you like to display here, right? Is it relevant to display the contact person? Maybe, right? Do you want to see, beside the targets investment, also the industry? Could be useful, right? You can reorder the order here. And then exactly make sure that you have all the information that you need, right, to make an informed decision when looking at this. Now, whether or not you add a sort to these kind of views depends on your preferences, right? Some people really like to always see an alphabetical order. We could do this, right? If we just like move them actually now both in this one thing, right? And then see, okay, let's add a sort by deal name. We could ensure that it's always an alphabetical order, but my preferred way of sorting this usually is by last edited date. So making sure that whatever was touched last shows up at the top, because chances are it will be most relevant again soon. We don't have that property here yet though, right? As you can see, we don't have access to it, but no worries. This is one of so-called Notion's system properties. So you can add them at any point when you realize they become relevant. To do so, let's actually quickly go to our table view here, right? Scroll all the way to the side. And then I'm just spotting we have tasks here and we haven't updated this icon yet. So let's do that. And then let's click either on this plus button here to add a property, or alternatively, we can also go to settings, edit properties, and then here say new property. And what we want is this last edited time. As you can see, we also have created time as a system property. So if you just want to sort by newest ones, this is also a good one. But in this case, I'm going to add this property. I'm going to hide it here from my view because I don't need to see it either by right-clicking hide or by clicking on the settings, property visibility, and then hiding here. But now if I go to the sort option, right, particularly on the pipeline board, we will see that I now have access to last edited time, and I can sort it in descending order, right, which means whatever deal was touched last always floats at the top of my Kanban board. Now we've seen pretty much all of the most relevant view types. There are just one big ones missing, and that is the calendar view, which you probably want to add to your task or anything right where you have due dates and you want to visualize them. So, and super simple, by adding this calendar view to your database, we can now say, okay, if there's a due date, for example, this one is due tomorrow, right? This one might be due today. We see them then popping up in our calendar. We can then also go back to our property visibility, right? And turn on, for example, okay, who's the owner of this task and what is, the context in which this one is relevant. You see also now how helpful it is to have this all in one property, that way you don't need to toggle on these 3 different ones. And then of course, right, maybe we'll not see the status of it as well in case it's relevant. Although we could just again, right, also say here, actually, since this is my calendar of things to do, I probably don't want to show done items. So let's add a filter to this status is not complete. Perfect. And that way, right, we created now this like neat little calendar view that we can later pull in different places. Last but not least, we have our timeline view. Timelines are probably most relevant on things like projects where they have a longer duration. It's exactly what the name tells you. It's this kind of Gantt chart looking style, where if you have no entries in here, right, and you say, okay, for the sample project, we have a certain duration. So for example, from 1st of August, and I can hold down Shift and click on the 31st to set this duration. And now it will be visualized right here on my timeline. Again, can turn on additional properties through property visibility if I wanted to. Probably not the most relevant one, right? Unless you want to also like visualize deal investment timelines, but just a good thing to know that this exists. Now, before we move on, I want to show you one last trick here, which actually involves already an automation, but it's very relevant at this point, and otherwise we need to go back and do a bunch of changes later, so let's talk about it now. Assuming you have your task on your task database, also one of these Kanban board views because you just like the visual dragging and dropping between them. You could now, of course, go ahead and use the same trick that we used on the deals database, right, of hiding this done column and pinning it in order to drag tasks into this last column. But particularly something with a very short pipeline like here, right, where you have only 3 or 4 stages, that A means you just have done not so many things to drag between. Plus, you might also want to see the tasks that you got done most recently. So in order to help with this and still avoid this from stacking up indefinitely, there are basically 2 options. There's one that involves takes the last edit time, and then there's one that uses smart motion automation. That's a more robust one, so I want to show it to you here. Basically, what we want to do is on a task database, we want to add a property, and this will be a date property, and we're going to call this completion date. And I'm going to add it. It's anyway like a good practice to have this completion date property on tasks on databases that have a status and that can be completed. It's kind of a personal preference, but it's nice because then later you could go back and have a look at sort of, okay, how do we actually perform, right? How do we track towards completion always? Now what we want to do is we want to click on the slash icon here and say, okay, set completion time. Right? This is our first automation. This will be the name. And the trigger for this will be that whenever the status property is set to complete, what we wanted to do is we wanted to go in and then as the action, edit a property, edit the completion date, and then set it to the date triggered. And then we can click on enable. What this does now is that whenever we send any task, right, to done, so let's actually like move them back to a different stage, right, maybe this here, and let's move this one now to completed. You see that in a second, this will fill out with the current date. And now this allows us to go back to our board view and set a filter. And it will be an advanced filter where you can say, okay, please show here only things where the status, and actually like it's a good idea to turn this into a group because we might want to add some filters to it in a second. I'll explain in a moment. So let's say name, status, is not done, which will hide everything in them. Or, so let's click in here, say, or the completion date is relative to the day this week, right? That would be one option. Or we could say is on or after 1 week ago, right? Which would basically mean tasks will remain in this done column for 1 week and then they will disappear. So now what happens if I take any task and I drag into done, it will first disappear for a second because it is set to done and the automation still needs to assign the completion date. But as soon as the completion date automation runs, right, this will pop up back here and you have this continuous log also of things that you've completed, which is just a really nice touch on there. Now, why did I move this into a group? Well, this is kind of where the power of advanced filters comes in. Because as you can see, we have an OR filter here, right? And so we say, okay, show me everything here where it's either done or was done in the last week. But now, since this is in this group, I can add additional conditions to it, like additional AND conditions. For example, if I wanted to see only my tasks here, right? I could now easily go in, add filter rule, right? And say again, right, where owner contains me. And you wouldn't be able to do this if you didn't have this in a group, because, right, it combines two different filter types, OR filters and AND filters. So that's just a little bit of a background, right, to build more complex filter rules here, so that you get exactly the kind of view that you want. That was a lot of database work, but it also sets us up perfectly for the second part of our build, when we're now creating the rest of the system around it, mostly the dashboards and the interface. To wrap this part up, let's just make sure we follow the Notion best practices when it comes to developing these workspaces, by turning all these databases into their individual pages and then organizing them in the backend. Doing so is super simple. All we need to do is click on the 6 dots next to your database and say turn into page. I'll go through everything in a second, right? So you don't have to watch me do this. Turn them all into these individual pages and then organize them elsewhere. The reason that you want to do this is so that you have all your master databases organized in one single place, right? There's never any confusion around it. This will help you also avoid duplicates, right? If someone doesn't know, do we have a database for that? Well, there's one place to check. And second, it avoids you accidentally deleting important information. Because this right now, right, is our actual deals database. So if we delete this, the deals are gone. But later, we're going to use a bunch of linked views of deals, right? Create linked view, and then go for deals. We'll have this a lot of times. And this one, with a little error, right? This one we can delete without any worries because it's just a linked instance. Now, when we build out a system, we will often hide this part, right, to make it look cleaner. And then it's really hard for someone to tell, is this the original or is this, a linked view? And just by making sure that there's never an original anywhere on a page, that they are all separate in their own location, right, you just eliminate this issue altogether. Those are just like 2 reasons, right, for this, but just want to quickly explain why we need to go through the step of turning them into pages and moving them away. So this is how our reworked page looks like now. One thing that you noticed, I have also added icons to all of them. When you turn them into a page, right, you will just have the default database icon there at first, but then you can click on it, right, to change the icon. And we want to keep with our general visual design language. So all those relations, right, remember, that we set with a specific icon, well, let's make sure that that is also the default icon on that database. And again, we have these 2 database updates and team directory that we haven't really worked with yet. Updates will play a role later in a moment. Team directory is just another fairly straightforward one, right? You can sort of like fill out all the properties that you want on there for keeping track of your team, right? You can add the bio, you can add their email. If you then want to, you can create a gallery view that shows their profile pictures. Pretty straightforward. So nothing to specifically take a look at. And then once we have all of this done, what I would like you to do is create a new page, right? Let's call this our backend and give it an icon that makes clear what this is, right? I like the server stack for this. And then let's move all our pages in here. And you can do so by simply, dragging sort of like a selector around all of them. Oops, sometimes a bit iffy, particular on if you're on the browser like I am right now. And then we drag everything in here. Right now we have all our databases organized in one place. If you want, we can also like further break it down. So like core databases, right? And supporting databases. This comes in down to like how much of a data architecture you have internally, right? But the most important thing is having it all separated in a database backend. And now we can start building out the actual front end of our system. With this done, we can now start creating the front end for our system. When doing this, you're basically designing a custom intranet or a custom app for your internal team. It needs a landing or homepage. It needs a page where people can find the most important information and all the knowledge of the company, plus pages for all the individual workflows that people are supposed to do. And here's where you can really express yourself and the needs of your team. So take what I now show you as kind of a first inspiration and a starting point, but then try to really make it your own. Let's start by building our main navigation page. And so in order to do this, I'm just going to type /page, right? And this will be sort of like home. And then I'm going to give this again, right, an icon just to stick with our design language. This one will be a house one. And here for this main landing page, right, the first thing that you want to think about is, well, what is the purpose? And it really works a lot like the landing page of an intranet, right, or of a website. And typically what we like to do is to treat this landing page as a quick navigation page, right? This is the very first page that will open when someone enters the Notion workspace and then allows them to quickly go to the most relevant parts. So the question is, what is the most relevant information about your fund, about your VC firm, right, that people need to see here so that they can quickly go to the areas where they need to be? Let's start by actually adding here 2 columns to sort of like lay out the page a little bit. And then let's add a call out to the left side. Now, one thing that you will see, like by default, your callouts probably look like this. You have this gray background and emoji. And that's nice if you want to have like a callout in the normal sense, sort of like drawing attention to something. But one trick for great Notion layouts is to actually click on the icon, remove it, and then also click on the 6 dots here and changing the color from the default from the gray background to default. And what this gets you is just this nice little outline box that makes for like really great visual elements on page. And we can just duplicate this by selecting it and clicking on duplicate or pressing Command D. And now we have these 2 nice boxes at the top of our page. And then on the left one, we can add something like, welcome to the Notion home for, like our VC firm. On this page, you'll find all the key information to navigate this workspace, something along those lines. Now, a second tip for creating like nice visual hierarchies on your pages is to actually think about what is the main part when it comes to text, right? Maybe we want to bold this. And then to sort of like help with this visual hierarchy is that we can actually highlight this part and then change the text color from the normal one to a lighter gray. And this just, in particular, if you have like pages with a lot of text, makes it easier for your eye, right, to scan and sort of like jump to the most important parts and then sort of deprioritize the lesser parts, and just, again, makes for a more balanced experience. On the other side, we might want to add some navigation to sort of the other key workflow pages, for example, to our company wiki, to our like deal management page, and maybe a general project management page. So let's just call this quick navigation. And then here, let's just add a placeholder for now while we come back as we build the other things out. We'll actually link them there. What I would already like to do here now, though, is to add an option to quickly jump into our funds and an option to quickly see the latest deals that we've added, because that might be just very relevant when we're here on this homepage. So let's click below here, and then let's add a new H2 heading, and let's call this funds. Then below here, now it's where our database backend comes in. We're going to type /create, link to your database, and we're going to search for our funds database that we previously set up. And once I click here, right, you sort of know what to expect. It pulls in that database, and you see the 2 views that we have set up, right, this table view and the gallery view, they already appear here as options. So I'm going to pick the gallery view because this is what I really like for navigation. And then in order to just make this a little bit cleaner, what we can do is we can make sure that here, right, for this view, we can actually take out the name and just put a space in there, right? And then we can swap this icon for our general fund icon, and it gives us this very clean and minimal look. We could even go cleaner, right, by hiding this complete UI here on the side. If we wanted to, right, if we want to keep the options there, we can leave them. And that way, right, we have a quick way to jump into our different funds. Now, for now, this doesn't do much, right? If I jump into a fund, there's not much here. It's just like the database properties. We haven't talked about this at all. There's also nothing here, right, to further navigate. And this is now where sort of like the next very important building principle about Notion comes in. And that is, whenever you have these kind of database hierarchies, right, where funds, remember our flowchart, connects to a lot of other elements, you want to be able for users to click into a fund and then see everything that is related to it, but everything that they need to know there. And for that, we need to start building our first Notion database templates and so-called self-referential filters. To get started, let's click on any of these entries. And now that we have the fund here, right, what we will see is, okay, we have all our properties here, but not much else. Now, in order to customize this, we can hover over the title of it, and then we see here customize layout. And this opens this layout builder for Notion, which allows us to structure how all the pages in this database should look like. So we don't just do this for the second fund, right? We do this for all entries at once. The first thing I would recommend is that we move this property group, right, of all the database properties in this side panel. Just click move to the panel. Now it's here, right? If you just apply this to all pages, what you see happens now, right, is that we have now here our fund And there's just this view details tab on the side to look at everything else that might be relevant there. So that's the first step. Let's go back to customize layout. And now let's think about, okay, what are the properties that are so important that we always want to show them here at the top? And you usually want to limit it to 4 so it looks nice and is well stacked. In order to do this, we can go here to the side, right? And let's think about what we want to pin, probably who's responsible for this, right? We might also want to pin the status of this fund and maybe the target sectors. All right, we could also add the year if we wanted to. Maybe that's also an interesting thing. Or the fund size actually probably more relevant. Right, let's have these 4 elements here. Again, we can click on apply to all pages to save it. And then we see, okay, if we now look at our second fund, right, we have those details always at the top. And then we can click on the 3 dots to learn more about it. Let's head back to our settings. The next thing that we can do is in the property group, if we want to, right, we can reorder things. So we can say, okay, deals, LPs, portfolio, vintage GMA, we want to see this all, and then committed capital and deployed capital. I'm just realizing also we need to still update this with formulas actually. We'll do it in a second. They are still the placeholder text properties. And if we wanted to, we could also add sections here. For example, we could say, okay, I want to have like one section with the funding details, right? And I want to have another one with sort of the key relations. And that will allow us then to say, okay, everything that is a relation property, so deals, LPs, portfolio, right, that will be here, and then the fund details will be in here, and that allows us then to just navigate a little bit quicker, right? Particularly if we have a lot of information, could hide and show certain of these, and makes it much easier, right, to keep track once your databases are getting really big. To further add to this, we can now actually pull the relevant information from these relations, right, from the connected deals and the connected LPs and portfolio companies into this view. In order to do so, let's click out of the selection that we have here and make sure we're in the general setup page for the funds one. And here you can see we can change our structure from simple to tab, which is a fairly recent Notion feature, but it's really cool and powerful in this context. Once I switch to tabbed, you see that I have here my content tab still, but now I have this plus option. And if I click on plus, we have the option to pick one of our relations that we have already set up. So for example, we can now say, okay, please show me actually here now the portfolio companies, right? And we will see that we get pulled in a view of our portfolio database with only the specific portfolio companies linked to our second fund. And we can test this, right? If we have this highlighted, the portfolio, you see we have here now our database setup options that we are familiar with. And under filter, it's already set up that, okay, show me only the portfolio companies connected to this fund. We can then customize it, and we can say, okay, which properties do we want? Unfortunately, here we don't have the option yet to pre-select from our pre-built views. That's a bit unfortunate. I wish Notion would add that, but we can just simply figure out, okay, what portfolio information would we want to see when we look at the fund, right? Let's hide everything at first. We probably want to know, okay, who is responsible for this company, right? What is the current valuation? What was our initial investment? Do we have a board seat? Yep, that sounds good. And then maybe also the relation to the company database so that we could jump from there to companies. That might also be relevant. But of course, right, you can design this any which way you want, right? We can also like resize the properties here to our liking so it all makes sense. And when we're happy, we can again click on all pages, apply to all pages, and see how it looks like. So now second fund, right? Here on content, we still have our normal Notion page where you could, take any notes about this fund. But now we have a tab that shows us, okay, these are all my portfolio companies. Now, one thing that you might notice, right, like it's getting a bit to the side here, right? Like there's again like a big database here. So what makes often sense is to turn on full width for all data pages here. And we can do this again by going to customize layout, clicking out of here of the general settings, and then making sure that full width is toggled on. Let's add the other tools as well, right? So let's click on plus. Let's add our LPs here. Again, property visibility. What do we want to see? We don't need to the commitment to fund. If they're invested in several funds, this might be relevant information. So let's make sure we see again, okay, who is the owner on this property, right? What are the funds that they are invested in? What is the investment focus? LP type? Yeah, actually all of this is pretty relevant. So we can leave all of these properties here. And then last but not least, let's pull in the deals as well, right? Which would be sort of like the things that we're currently looking at for the pipeline. And then check, okay, what properties do we need to see here? Maybe a bit less here, right? Maybe here we mostly care about the owner and we care about the status. Where's it? Deal stage, right? That was our status option. And then maybe the thesis. But you can, again, customize this to your liking. Click apply to all pages. Now we have this neat little option, right, where you can click through all the core information. We can also add more from here, right? So we can link to existing. So for example, if we had already an LP in there, I can click link on existing and pull it in there. If we don't, we can create a new LP for this fund directly from here. It will automatically be linked to this fund, right? If I click on new page, sort of like test LP, right, we'll see he's committed to the second fund. That works already, right? This owner property is not set up correctly, right? So we would need to go back now to our database, make sure we have our default in here. That's something we forgot earlier. But yeah, we have now this general building blocks in here to see all the related information to the fund. Now, one thing that you notice is if we try now to navigate back to our homepage, it's actually a bit tricky because here in our breadcrumbs, you see we have funds, but that brings us to our database. Then we have backend, which brings us to our databases. And then this sort of like parent page notion for VC, right? And then we were back at home. So it's quite cumbersome to do this. So instead, what we also always recommend when building these kind of dashboards is to make sure there's a quick back home button on them. In order to do that, right, what we can do is we can click on this dropdown here, and we can set up our first database template. Now, the database templates and database layouts are two things that can easily be confused. The database layout that we set up, right, automatically applies to all pages, and whenever you can only have one per database, and whenever you make any changes to it, it will make these changes on all pages. Whereas database templates influence what is in this content, what gets preloaded into this content tab here in the beginning, right? And you can have any number of templates on a page, right? So you could have a different template for this type of fund or this different template for this type of meeting. But once it's applied, it doesn't automatically update when you change the template later on. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go to funds. Let's click on the dropdown and set up a new template. You can do this from anywhere where you have this database. Let's call this just new fund. One thing that I really like to do is to also set our default icon for funds here. We'll get to why in a second. And now you can see I can sort of predefine what should come in here into the page. And all I want is I want a button that says, go home. And we can add our little health icon in there. And we can say when this button is clicked, ends the action, please open as a page our homepage, right? So let's search for home. Here it is. Click on done. We want to open home as a full page. And then done, and then we can click out of it. And now, if we open any of our funds, right, for example, the first fund, we can see where we can apply this template. So it will load it in, and in a second, you will have the option to have, or we have this button here that allows us to jump back to our homepage, right? So I click on here now, and now we're back on home, which makes for a much better experience, right? Now, the other one, second fund, right, doesn't have this already, where we would need to click in here again to apply the template and then to wait for it to load. So this is not the best user experience. So what you want to do is, as soon as we have our button here to go back home, is to make sure that the template that we've created is the default, right? So let's click on the dropdown, set this as a default, which now means whenever we create a new fund, it will automatically load this page layout for it. So I create my third fund, right? And you see it's already loading down here, and in a second, right, we will have the option to go home with it. Now, the one thing to keep in mind here, what I mentioned, right, this doesn't auto-update. Let's say, right, we update this here and we edit it. And besides this go home button, we also want to have, maybe there's some information that we always want to collect about the fund, right? Maybe there's a little call out that we want to add here. We write a little about our 4 goals with this fund, whatever it is. Well, if we create a new page, right, a fourth fund, if you want, then you will see that it automatically loads this in, both the button and this text, but our other funds don't have this yet, right? So this is sort of like the drawback of using database templates. They're very powerful with adding all these elements, but whenever you change the template in the future, you would need to go back in and update that template for your existing databases and entries. You can do so always by deleting all the page content from it, right? Then you go back to the selector, but it can get a little bit cumbersome. So just one thing to keep in mind. But perfect, we've created our first nice little navigation loop, right? Where we have now on our main page, we can pull in our funds. People can click on a fund to learn more about it, right? They can see the core information. They can pull in everything else that we have on the database. They can also look at the portfolio companies that belong to this fund and all the information that we have about that. LPs, the deals, right? And sort of like start managing funds from this fund dashboard. And we've learned how to create a database template, right? Apply it to it, and a little bit of navigation and a little bit of context to it, and use it to quickly go home, right? And just to iterate this point again, right? The page that you have here is just a normal Notion page. So it has all the other blocks that you're used to, right, and that you like. So you can add headings, you can create any kind of structure. We will later, with projects maybe, we will see like a little bit more of other elements that we would typically add to this. But for now, this is a great start for our fund pages and allows us to quickly jump around between our new homepage and our different funds. Now, the second thing that we wanted to add here, right, was a quick way to see the most recent deals that have come into our pipeline. So let's type /h2. Right, let's call this most recent deals, and let's add another linked view of a database below, this time of deals. And here we have it, right? We probably want to pull not the full pipeline, right, but just like a table in there, because on this table we then just want to show the most recent deals. Now the way we can do this is first we're going to hide again like this database title, right, to make it a bit more minimal. Change the name here. Just put a space in here and add the little icon for deals, since the main heading on this page already tells us what this view will be about, right? Then what we can do is we can go to property visibility, hide them all, and just think about, okay, what are the most important properties that we need to see when a new deal comes in? Probably the owner, that's one we want to see. The deal stage, just in case someone has started working on this already. The industry might be relevant, and then maybe let's see. The business model, yeah, so some information about it, right? So we can sort of quickly scan that. I don't want to add another property here. And then in terms of the sort, we want to make sure that we see the newest ones at the top. So I'll click on sort, and then in this case, we are going to take the created time as a property. I just actually created this off screen in the break, but you can quickly do this same thing by going to edit properties, click on plus, new property, and then add that. And that allows you to set a filter, right, for like the news, sorry, not a filter, but like a sort for just your newest items. And whenever something new gets added to this list, right, it will pop up right at the top here. So you can always do a quick scan of, okay, these are the last things that have entered our pipeline. Now, of course, in order to make deals easier to navigate, we should make the same changes that we did to funds. So first, what we want to do, let's go in and add a new database template, right? Actually, Notion AI, as we can see, created it and set something as a default. We can inspect this by clicking on the three dots here and clicking on edit, and we can see, okay, this is the template that I thought it should apply. So that's not bad, right? But we need to change the icon, because our deal icon will be the rocket ship, right? You can call this just new deal. And then here, we want to also add just this back button, right? So let's add a button. Let's call this go home, right? Add our little house icon there. And then as the action, select open, and then our home page as an option. And then again, right, as full page, click on that. So that's step number one. Now, one little trick here, right, to if you want to build out more robust navigation than just these go home buttons and be able to later update it, what you can do, what you can use here is what is called a synced block. So if you just click out into the home, and by the way, I'm just asking AI, right, to fill out this database with a few bit of sample data so we can later like visualize it nicely. So don't be confused if things start popping up here. But what we can do is we could go back to our backend, right? And then we could add a new section here, and let's call this synced blocks. And let's call this like one thing that we want to add here maybe is the general navigation. And so in order to add this, let's type /synced, right? This gives us this sync block option. Now you see this red outline. Basically everything within this red outline can now be spread across our workspace, and if we make a change in one place, it will be updated everywhere, which is great for these elements that you might want to add to a template, right? For example, like navigation, so go home or go elsewhere. And where you think like, okay, maybe I want to add additional 8 elements to this navigation later on, but I don't want to have to update like 17 different places. So this is how you get this done, right? Let's add our first button here, right? The rocket ship, not rocket ship, the house, and go home. Click on new action, right? Open page. Make sure we open our home here as a full page. Sounds good. And let's actually, just to show that we have some different elements also in there, we can also just drag another block in there. So let's just drag this block into our sync block, and let's add here sort of like 2 columns. And let's have one block here on the left side, and then on the later down the line where we could add sort of like a second one on the side. I'm just going to add some placeholder text So you get the idea for it. Now if we just hover over this, you see this copy and sync option. So let's click on here. And then let's go first into our funds database. Update the template here, right? 3 dots, edit. Delete the button that we have here so far and add in our synced one. Same for deals, right? Let's click on new, edit, and make sure we replace this one with our sync block. And this has now the advantage, right? If I apply this anywhere, so for example, Food Tech Labs, right? Let's apply our new deal template. And I go back to my sync blocks, placeholder 1, 2, 3, right? I've updated this. If I go back now to this same deal, right? Food Tech Labs, we see it update here. So that makes it just like a little bit easier, right? To create these components on pages that later update, and you don't have to do it from scratch. But perfect. We have our Go Home navigation now also on our most recent deals. You see this list has just started to fill up. So probably good to add like a load limit here now as the last step. In order to do so, we can click on the 3 dots, then on layout. I can't, otherwise I will leak some new database view partially. Bad timing for this video. But there's at the bottom a load limit option where you can just limit it to 10. I'm just going to do this off screen, then we have a bit more control here. All right, there we have it. And now we see we always will see the latest last 10 deals that have been added to it with the option to load more. And now if we click on any entry, right, we have our sort of new template here that allows us also to go from there back to our homepage if we wanted to from deals. Our homepage is slowly taking shape. So let's actually add also the active projects below there. And I think then we're pretty good and can start moving into the dedicated workflow pages. So /h2, right? You know the drill by now. This will be active projects. Then we're going to look for a linked database view of our projects database. Let's see where we are here with this project database. And you see I have too many databases in my workspace. Kind of hard to find the correct one. So let me actually quickly just go to the backend, right? And here projects, let's call this VC projects for a second, just so we can easier find it. Shouldn't be an issue when you are building this out, right? Because I assume you have only one projects database here, but sometimes for these demo workspaces it can get a bit tricky. So link view of database, and let's look for VC projects. Yes, there we are, perfect. And then we can pull in the navigation view, right, that we've already set up to quickly just show these core projects here together with their progress bar. Let's then make sure that we, as usual, hide our database title, right, and just replace the name of this with a space and then the target icon for the most minimal view. And now we can quickly jump into our projects. For projects, we will go through the same process of setting up our database layout and templates, but this time with a bit of a twist, because I want to show you a second approach in Notion to build these dashboards. Remember, similar to this dashboard that we built here for funds to quickly access portfolio LPs and deals. Well, there's another method that has a lot of benefits to it, gives you a little bit more control, but is a bit harder to update later on. So how does it look like? Well, let's start by actually clicking into a sample project and making sure we tidy up the layout here. So customize layout, move this to the panel, and then pin the properties that we want. So we want to pin the owner, the status, the progress, and then the duration we could pin, or actually what you can do as well, right? If you want to highlight certain properties, you can also click on plus here. And that allows you to also sort of like display certain properties a bit larger than otherwise. Now, we're not going to swap this time to tab view, right? Though we certainly could, and we could then pull in the tasks for the sample project. And instead, we're going to use this other method. So let's quickly click on apply to all pages here. Go back to projects. And one thing I just noticed when looking at this, when I was setting up the database, right, we've jumped over creating the relations to meetings and docs. So we only have tasks related. So let me quickly fix this, right? I want one relation to our meetings in the YouTube container. Here we are. Perfect. This will be meetings, a two-way relation, right? Project. And then with our meeting icon plus a relation to the docs database, also in our YouTube container. Let's see where that one is. Here, that should be this one. Two-way relation to projects, add relation. Perfect. Quick fix here to make sure we have all the things ready. And now what we want to do is we want to create another database template. So again, drop down, new template. Let's call this new project. Let's give it the corresponding icon for it. And now let's open this in a big view, right, and make sure we set up this template correctly. So I will just type now /h2 and we will add a toggle heading and we will call this tasks. And now what we can do is we can pull in here our task database, right? So let's type /create link view of database. Let's look for our VC tasks. I did the same naming trick here, right, to easier find it. And then let's pull in as a specific view, right, all the open tasks. Perfect. So now what we have, right, is a linked view, but it shows all open tasks, so regardless of the project. But the same trick that we used, right, for when we set up the tabs, it had automatically a filter applied to only show related entries. Well, we can also do this manually here. All we need to do is click on the filter, say, okay, let's add a rule to this. Status is not done, perfect. And second rule, where project contains and now new project, right? This will always match the name of the template that you're currently setting up. So this will be that. And now we see first everything disappears because nothing is linked to this template, but that's fine. Once we apply it, it will work correctly. So let's just quickly hide this, right? And then go out of here. Click on our template project, right? Apply this template, see how it looks in practice. And we see we have now this toggle here, and we can open it, and we have our open tasks. So in a very similar way to the tabs, right, it allows us to pull all the related entries into the body of a page. But with this approach, we can take it one step further because tabs, they're great. But of course, right, sort of like every tab is one specific view. And specifically, if you want to have different ways of looking at the data, for example, all your open tasks, or the tasks assigned to you, or completed tasks, then it can get quite quickly a bit tricky, right, with just the visual load of everything. So this is a better way for a more advanced setup. So first, let's actually make sure we set this as a default so it gets applied to all new entries. Then edit it again. And now let's make sure that we build on top of this, add a few more views for tasks, and then also add docs and meetings in here. To do so, right, let's just right-click this, duplicate it. Let's call this done tasks, right, and change this to a filled checkbox. Where is it? Here. And then we just add to this filter we've already set up. Right, we modify it to say where the task is done. Perfect. And then if we wanted my task as well, let's duplicate the open tasks again. Right, let's call this my tasks, and then the little star. And then here, right, for the filter, we just add onto this and owner contains me. So now we have our three views here, and we can close this toggle just to reduce the visual load. We can go one further, right? Can do another H2 toggle heading, and this time we can call this meetings. Now, one thing that I also like to do, but that's sort of as a personal preference, I like to give them actually icons. So I like to have the checkbox for the tasks, for the meetings. Usually it's the handshake, and then for docs, it's the folder. Just makes it a bit easier to scan it visually. So for meetings, same idea, right? /create link view of database. Let's pull in our VC meetings. There they are already. Perfect. Let's pull in the my meetings view, or actually like the default view is fine, probably, because we probably don't have too many meetings here, right? So let's just call this all meetings, add a little nice icon here for the property visibility. I think this should be fine. Yeah, that all looks good. Project actually we can hide because it will be self-explanatory that it shows up here, belongs to this project. Just need to make sure we set our filter again, right? Add a filter where the project contains new project. Perfect. And then just to go through this motion one more time, right? Another toggle heading. This time, let's look for a folder. Let's call this docs. And then again, right here, /create link view of database. VC docs. There they are. Let's pull in again also here all docs. I assume that we don't have that many there. My database title, right? Rename this to all docs. Give it a folder icon, and then make sure that for our filter, we have it set to projects, contains new project. Perfect. So this is a simple dashboard, right, for our projects. But just as a quick side note, why don't we do this all the time? Like, why don't we use sometimes the tab view, sometimes this? Actually, there's a bit of a preference, right? Both of them have their pros and cons. If you prefer this look with the toggles in the page, you could go to your funds, right, and just change it. You could remove the tab stand, add this to the template, or the other way around, right? If you say, no, actually, I want to have these tabs everywhere, could take the same approach, right, by customizing the layout and applying this. Just one side note, right? If you use this approach, what I mentioned already, if you already applied a template to something, right? For example, here, you see it doesn't automatically update, like with the tabs. So here I would now need to just go in, right, remove everything from the page content, and now I can load in this new project template with all the entries. But of course, for everything that you create new after that, it will automatically be applied, right? So sort of like, let's say, improve the charter tooling system, right? This might be our project here. We hit enter, we see it immediately loads the thing. And the cool thing, of course, right, just as a side note, everything that we create through here will automatically be linked to this project. So if I add another task, right? So hire Matthias to fix our Notion, right? We see, of course, immediately the context is this specific tool, right? That's where this is assigned. If we also look at the details, right, for this project, we see this is one of the tasks that belongs to it. All right, so let's go back from here to our homepage, right? And there, not much to do, right? We already have our active projects in here, but now they have nice dashboards that we can click into, right? And we see all the relevant context for that specific project. And with one click also can jump back to our homepage. Pretty good. Now let's start building out our first workflow pages. What I would like you to encourage to do here is to keep in mind that this will be our main navigation page, right? Our homepage. Now we want to build specific pages that help us do one thing, right? And that depends on the workflows that you have in your company. But typically, right, that will mean, okay, we need one way to sort of just see everything that is what I like to call what's on my plate, right? Your tasks, the things that you own, and so on and so on. Then maybe a dedicated view for specifically managing the deal flow, right? This will be a very essential part of running your VC firm. Plus, last but not least, a quick way to just access the information in the company. So let's build them in that order. And in order to start, we actually can go back up to a quick navigation and we can create a new page here. Now, whether you create this actually as a top level page here or as a page elsewhere and just link to it, doesn't really matter that much, particularly if you do your first Notion setup. So here, what we can simply do is create type / page, and we can call this our what's on my plate page. It's like a concept that I really like to create in a lot of new entry-level systems, just to help people, that everyone has the same dashboard that they look at, where they see everything assigned to them. And we don't have to go out and create individual dashboards just yet. That's something you can do later, and that's what we typically do, with more mature teams using Notion. But since this will be your first Notion setup, let's keep it a bit simple. And let's just look just for the food icon here, literally, right? Let's what's on my plate view after all. So this one is a nice one. And now here we're going to create a dashboard where it shows, again, everything from the whole company that has been assigned to me. And since we have owners on every single entry, right? That means every single data point that is relevant for me will show up here. Now, the first thing we need to do, since we will have a lot of database on this page, is we want to click on the top right corner, 3 dots, full width. So we have just a bit more screen real estate. And now we can kind of go through the most important points on these pages, since this is the thought being here, right, that this is kind of my to-do list and my entryway for a lot of my actual work. I want to have tasks at the very top, right? Even though, of course, on the main page, we have sort of funds and then deals, right, as big entryways. But when managing your day-to-day work, you probably want to start from tasks. So let's tab /. I like to add, again, these as tutorials, right? Just so we can organize and structure the page a bit. And add, with the checkbox, right, my tasks part. And then same game as for the dashboard. Create link view of database. Look for our VC tasks. And then pull in this time the my tasks view, right, that we've already built. And there we have it, right? All my tasks. I can now quickly hide this. And if I wanted to, right, I could create additional views here for like sort of, my tasks today, right? Let's actually do this, right? Let's just as an example, right? We could duplicate this and then call this today, right? Maybe with a calendar icon to go with this, and then add like a filter to it that says, okay, and the due date, right, is on or before. So everything today, and in the past it should have happened already, is on or before today, which just gives me kind of my checklist for that specific day. One quick Notion tip also here. When you're building these to-do lists, it can sometimes be nice to not have this as a, this status property, not like this, because 2 clicks to check something off can sometimes be a bit annoying. What you can do is you can simply hover over it, say edit property, and then say display as. And then you can say for this specific view, I would like to display this as a checkbox. And now it's simply a checkbox. You can move it to the very front and you can make it very small, right? So you can make it basically nearly disappear. And now that's just easier, right, for people to then go through and just check things off. Feels a bit more like a traditional to-do list. And we still might have our context option here that quickly allows us to add that. So those are tasks. Let's go through, right? What's the next thing that we want? Maybe the deals actually the next thing that I care about, right? But you can, of course, customize this to whatever would be most relevant in your team, right? In this case, let's get the rocket. Yep, perfect. Deals, and then here again, right? Create link view of database, pull in deals from our backend, pick my deals, right? You could also actually do the pipeline bot and then just filter this for mine. So like, let's actually do this maybe, right? But you see, thanks to our pre-built views, right, it's so much quicker for us now to create these things here. So going through this extra effort in the backend, even though it can be a bit theoretical at first, really helps us to put these things together much faster. So let's just add this me filter here, right, where you say, okay, anything where the owner, right, contains me, those are the ones that I want to see here. And then we can, close it all off. And now we see, okay, these are the deals that I'm responsible for. Let's move them a bit to the other ones just so you can see it a bit clearer. We can also then here on this specific view, right, turn off this information because it's kind of redundant. I know that I am the person. So we'll make this modification, right, turn on or off, and instead I want to see the contact on those, makes it a bit easier. And then we can also like hide this database title and just call this, like on my leads. Perfect. One quick thing that I'm noticing as we are looking at it is that actually here, this is the plain text property, right? So now that we're catching this, we probably want to update it, right? So in order to do this, we could just go to our property settings, go on contact, and make sure, right, that instead of this being a text, it is now a relation to our actual contact database. With another VC contacts that as, which one is it? I think it's this one probably. Perfect, yes. Two-way relation to the deal. And now we have actually the correct style set up here, which means we can now connect those here. By the way, if you have these properties, right, you can hover over the card, click on edit, and all the properties that you've added, even if they're not filled out, are visible in there. So here we can simply link this right to Tim Cook, and this one might be Steve Jobs. And now we have a quick way right from our board here, from our personal board, to jump also in the contact cards. We see, right, the contacts, we haven't really set up this, but the same game would apply here, right? Customize layout, making sure we pin the most relevant properties. But good for now, right? Let's close our deals part off and let's just keep going. Let's add a few more to our What's on My Plate page. So I just added pretty much all the database that we have right here in the system with our toggles, and then always within the toggle, the core view filtered for all my entries. But it's of course just a starting point. Again, this is about creating this sort of like default homepage that makes sense for people in your team. You can later customize them, but for now, right, I would just encourage you to think about, okay, how do I want them to navigate this, right? What should they see front and center? Maybe tasks are so important, they shouldn't live in a toggle, right? Maybe we want to pull that out. Or maybe we still want to have them, see the funds, right, as this like quick navigation at the top to be easier, make it easier to go in there, right? Or for projects, right? You could just drag them out of there, right? Rearrange these elements on the page like the building blocks that they are. You have full flexibility here. One thing that I would definitely recommend, though, that you add is, again, right, a little bit of navigation and some quick actions. So in order to do this, let's actually type call to. And then here on the left side, we want to add the navigation bar, right? So like nav placeholder. We're going to add this in a second. And then on the right side, we want to have some quick actions. So I'm going to add a call out, right? Just so we get our nice little button around it. And then here, maybe also again in a 2-column layout. So I'm going to add 2 more columns inside of it. Then I'm going to type /button. And now these buttons, we can add them so that they can quickly create new tasks, new deals, right, new entries in our system. So for our task, let's just say, okay, in this case, we want the checkbox, right? And when the button is clicked, then please add a page to, and we can select our database, right? So this will be VC tasks. Perfect. We can give it a name if we want to, but there's no need to, right? We could add any property. So we could also say like add a task for the day and could set the due date for our current date if we wanted to. It's actually called add task. And then when we're happy with it, what I would always recommend when you add these elements is that you add a second step and say, okay, and after we've added it, please open this newly added page, right, in the side peek so we can edit it. Because otherwise you have this thing where people keep pressing the button, they don't know, does it do anything? And you just add a bunch of tasks and they're all empty, not what you want. So let's click on done, right, and then test it. We click the add task button, and we can also open this so we see like how it looks like. Add tasks, and there we see the new task pop up. So let's say, okay, send Matthias an email. Perfect. We actually see, right, that we haven't like customized this. So let's do this quickly because task is such an important database. So let's go to customize layout, move this to the panel, and then in here, right, what we want to pin is the owner, the status, and the due date plus the context. That's what we care about, right? All the rest can stay here, apply to all pages, and then quickly head back. And now we see, right, we have our class that we just created, and we can check it off if we wanted to. And of course, right, if we check it off, we automatically set the completion date there as well. So pretty neat. That's the first button we want to add. And we can add the same style of button pretty much for any kind of entry, right, where we want to add something directly. So for example, we could just take another button, right? Let's go back in here. And let's say, okay, maybe we want a second button just to explain the concept, right, for like a folder. And let this one will be add doc. Here, our action will be to add a page to our documents. You see docs, right? Database. There we go. Add second action, open page that we just added in our sidebar. Perfect. Add doc, let's test this. Here's a new document, right? Sample notes. And we can see also if we check, oops, in our notes toggle, it pops up there in a second. Actually it doesn't, because we forgot to set a default here for owner. So again, like as you build out a system, you will often find elements that you've forgotten to get to in the beginning. That's totally normal. That's a good thing also about Notion, right? It's very forgiving. You can just, as you encounter these things, make sure you put on the finishing touches as long as you know in general, right, how to build out this best practice system. This will help you always stay on track. Now let's do one slightly more complicated quick add feature. And let's do this for, let's say, contacts. That's, I think, a good example. Wherever we want to make sure that we fill out certain data always, right? With something like notes or like tasks, people might fill out some meta information. They might leave free others. But when it comes to information, for example, like a deal opportunity, right, or a contact, we want to make sure that the relevant information is captured all the time. And we can do this by creating a form. For that, let's actually navigate back to our backend for a moment. So let's go here. And let's do this for the contacts database. Here, let's click on creating a new view. And here what we want to do is we want to create a form view. Again, I can't show you just the pop-up that comes because that would leak something, but you can click on plus and then select the form option. Once you select the form, it will ask you whether it should, based on all the properties that you have, already add these as questions to the form. And let's do this, makes it a bit easier while we don't have to create from scratch. So let's say, yes, please do this. We can give this a title, right? Add new contact. And then just give it a description. Please fill out the information below to add a new contact to our CRM. Now, you can click on any field that you have in there, and you can see a bunch of options pop up that will depend on the type of property that you have here, and also reorder the form right to your liking. The most important thing to keep in mind is that you should always turn off sync with property name here. Because right now, if we would change the title of the question, we would also rename the property. And that's often not what we want, right? Often we want to have it a bit more explanatory here, but like very succinct in the database. So let's turn this off. Now we can rename this to what's the contact name. If we want to, we could also add a description to it, and we can make it required to make sure it definitely filled out. Then for location, right? Same idea here. Can make this required if we wanted to. Phone number, industry, you get the gist, right? They have the pre-select options here. They can select things from the dropdown. You can also make sure can they connect this to several companies, right? Or should they always be able to connect to one? Whatever it is, right, that you want, we're just going to like make a few of these options required, reorder it a little bit, and then just to show you like how you can then integrate with the system, you can then click on share form, copy the form link, and then we can go back to our homepage and then to what's on my plate, and add now here a new button, right? And say add contact. Grab our corresponding icon. And now here, instead of adding an entry directly, what we can do is say, okay, please open a page. Please open the form that we just created, and we can paste it in. Add new contact. In the center peak, right, as a nice pop-up. Click on done. Now, if we click on this, it doesn't add a contact yet. Instead, it just opens up the form, and we can enter the information, right? So this would be TS Frank. Hello at tsfrank.de. Those, I think, are all required fields, right? Did we make something else required? I don't think so. We could say, okay, he's like a founder, right? His LinkedIn.url linked, right? Whatever we want in there. The owner, we can leave empty. What's industry, technology, and so on, right? You see kind of like how this structures the submission a bit better. Now I can click on submit, and it has been added. And through that, right, you can make sure that people always fill out the relevant information when they do this. So we have a simple page done that will help our team stay on track of everything, right, that is on their to-do list kind of. Now let's build another one that is specifically focused for deal flow. We're just grabbing another new line, adding it in here, right? Typing again / page, and this will be our deal flow management page. Again, I want full width to just have a bit of screen real estate to work with. And then at the very top, we're going to add again, like probably our 2-column layout, right? With a placeholder on the left, placeholder, and then some quick actions on the other side. And we can see which actions make more sense here, right? It will probably be around like adding deals through a form similar to contact, and so on and so on. We can just leave this there for the moment and then focus on the rest of the page. Now, one thing that often makes sense on these like management pages, right, is to give people high-level data at a glance. And since our deal flow management, right, will mostly revolve our pipeline, well, let's visualize that, right? Let's tell people how things are looking. So in order to do this, what we could do is we could maybe go for like a 2-column layout here as well, right? And in those 2 columns, we could add 2 charts. And maybe actually, like do sort of like a 1/3, 2/3 split here. In order to add a chart, right, we type /chart, and we can pick which one we want. Let me just move myself out of the way. And then let's here go for donor chart first, where we want to visualize, okay, so like our latest deals that have come in, like how many have we recently, added to our pipeline. So I'm going to click on this. We're going to look for our deals database. Here it is. And now we can start building our chart. For a donor chart, it's pretty simple, right? We have one thing that we want to show, and we can break it down. So in this case, what do we want to break it down by? Well, probably not by stage. And we would rather break it down probably by industry, right? Or by revenue model, or whatever is sort of like the most important thing, or like who brought it actually. That might also be very interesting, right? Like who brought which lead. But in this case, let's pick for now the industry, and then each slice represent count. That's great. And then we're going to add a filter, because right now it just shows us all our deals in the pipeline. But we want to see only the ones that have just entered, right? So let's add a filter. Oops, sorry. Out like this, add an advanced filter, and say, okay, give me everything where the created time, right, is on or after, and let's say 1 month ago, which shows us then sort of like our deal flow, right, for last month. Now, of course, in this case, right, everything that I just added is within the last month, but we can just pretend, right, that this is like a more mature setup where we can actually like filter down the information. And if you want to reduce the size on this, which I typically like to, right, because we don't need to see that much, we can go into the settings again, and we can move the height from medium to small. And we just have this little bar chart here as a side that tells us, okay, this is sort of like how our most recent deal flow looks like. And then let's visualize how our pipeline overall looks like. So next to it, we're going to add another chart. This time I want a vertical bar chart. And here, we're again going to pick our deal pipeline. And what I want to visualize now at the bottom is the deal stage. That's perfect, right? What we want to show towards the top is the count of every item. That's also correct. And this basically, with just one click, right, gives us this overview. Okay, here's how our deals, are stacking up over this, whole period, right, of all the stages that we have in the system. If we want more information, we could say, okay, let's filter certain things out, right? Let's maybe focus only on the deals this year. Or let's group it by who's the owner, right, or by the industry. That's an interesting one. In order to get this additional layer of data, you can click on settings and then click on group by. And could, for example, say, right, who's the owner, right, for us internally, or what is the, again, industry of these deals. Just gives it a bit more information here. And then just to make sure that all of these are aligned, typically also here, like to go in and say, okay, for, more style options, let's change the height to small. Most of the time, right, if we just want to get this high-level overview, this is helps us judge things at a glance and keeps both of these sides nicely aligned. Moving on, let's go further down the page and let's help us create some specific workflow views. So for example, we probably want to start again with our toggle headings. I'm a big fan of them to structure these long pages so that you can hide and show relevant information. And let's start with sort of like newly sourced deals. And in here, we can go ahead, right, say, okay, /create link view of database, please show me my deals. And then specifically in deals, I would like to see all the deals. And now we're going to modify the settings here, right? First, hiding this, right? Let's just, since the headline here will be self-explanatory, right? We can remove this. Can sort of just like add the clock icon here, right, to indicate it's the most recent ones. Our sort is already there, right? But in case of the deal stage right now, so I'd rather have the created time descending, right? This gives me now my newly most recent deals at the very top. and then we can work on the properties. Maybe here I don't care too much about that, and we don't need the company link there for now, right? We can add that in maybe later. What I really care about is, what is the deal stage, right? What is the industry? Actually, deal stage we don't care about either probably, because we need to add this as a filter, right? We need to say, okay, only show me things here where the deal stage is sourced, right? So the ones that are waiting for the initial kickoff. What is the industry? That's perfect. What's our target investment? If we have that at this point, probably not, right? So let's remove this. This is something that we need to see only later. Revenue is relevant, right? What fund we're working towards to, maybe. There's also like some data we could fill out later. The way you want to think about this, right, is you want to only show the properties that are relevant when you're in, reviewing newly sourced deals mode. The contact is probably a lot more relevant, like a thesis, right? The business model, these sort of things, right? That's what we kind of care about. What other data do we have there? Reason to reject is obviously not relevant at this point, unless we want to reject from this view. So maybe, but let's actually hide it for now. Deal notes, let's hide this. Description is fine. Tasks we can also hide for now. Now we have just the relevant properties, right? When we think about, okay, these are our newly sourced deals. Now one tip, even with this wider screen real estate, right? We still need to scroll horizontally. In order to make this a bit easier, I recommend you right click the first column and then say freeze. And this now allows you to, scroll with keeping the actual name of the deal here in front. If you wanted, more things freeze, you could do that as well. But I find usually this is the sweet spot, right? To keep all the context alive while scrolling, while still being able to, read everything vertically and horizontally. Let's also use this opportunity to actually build our first automation. I know automations are actually really for the third part of the video, but again, like at this point, it just makes sense to showcase one of the things you could do. At this point, right, deals have just come in, and if we build the one automation I want to showcase later, right, they might actually come in also automated from our system. So what we might want to do on this view, right, for the newly sourced deals is we just want to be able to quickly claim it, right? Of course, we could go in, right, and say, okay, I am the owner rather than the AI that has set this up, right? And want to create maybe a task for myself, but we can also wrap this into a button. In order to do so, let's click here to create a new property. And let's call this, claim deal. And what we want to do is we want to make this a button, and on click, we want this to assign the deal to us and create our task for us to do the initial deal review. So, oops, sorry for that. I clicked there on myself. In order to set this up, let's click on claim deal, edit automation. And then we want to say, when this button is clicked, what do we want to do? Well, first, we want to edit a property. We want to make sure the owner is set to the person who clicked the button. Then we want to maybe also move it along in the stage, right? So we want to say, okay, the deal stage will be moved now to initial review. And then we need to add a task to my own task list, right? That I have to do this. So I click on add action, add page 2. And then we will add this to our, VC tasks. VC tasks, here we go. And task name, we can already give this a name, right? We know what this task is supposed to be. It will be review details for. And then we can even input the name of that deal, right? And we can do this by typing at. And here we now see, okay, from sort of like what page do we want to input, right? And we can just link to this page. So review details for this page. And then last but not least, we want to make sure that this task is linked to this deal correctly, right? So it pops up in the context. So we say here, okay, deal, please connect this to this page that we have here. All right, so just to review again, right? When we click the button, we will update properties on the deal, and then we will create a new entry in our task database that tells us, well, I have to review this entry. If we wanted to, we could also additionally assign it to ourselves, but right, we know tasks that are created by a person automatically belong to them. So we don't really need to do that, and we can just click on save. Now, what should happen, right? Let's actually like open this here on the side. What should happen when I click this button is that it should change the owner to me. It should also create a task, but currently there's probably no task, right? It's empty. And it should move this to the next stage. It actually means it will disappear from here, right? Because it's no longer in this initial stage. So let's click the button and test. I click on here, and in a second, right, it should change the owner property here. Let's see whether it does that. It created the task successfully. Perfect. What else did we have? It moved it for the initial review. It didn't update the owner, so we need to have a look what the issue is with that. Let's quickly look at the automation. Replace with whoever clicked the button. Okay, maybe it has some, maybe sometimes it needs to refresh once to correctly show that, or it's a temporary bug, but it looks like the automation should work correctly. Let's just see here again, right? If I assign this, for example, to Jill for a second, maybe just has an issue with that MCP server. Let's claim that deal. Yes, now it gets replaced correctly. Right, we move it on to the next stage. We create a task. That task now will pop up on my what's on my plate page, right? Just sort of to show you how all these things are starting to tie together. We have now these new tasks, not for today, but in our journal, right? Review details for prop venture techs and food tech labs. And we have, this initial review step, right, of our deal flow managed page already ready with this very simple button click. Now, what else do we need on here? Well, we definitely want our overall deal pipeline here. So I'm just going to, again, create a new H2 toggle heading. This time we will call this our deal pipeline. And here I'm going to add, right, again, / create link view of database, searching for deals, going to add that, and I'm going to load in our pre-created pipeline board view that we already have, right, from our backend. We can then hide the database title here, and then we have, pretty much across the board, right, like this. These are the deals that we're currently working on in our firm, with just one click away from additional information. Where we could show other stuff, we could add filters. I think this is pretty good here. Here I want to really see all the deals at like the, a global view. We also might want to have just a table of them, right? That's also fine. We could just, what we have here for the newly sourced deals, we could repeat this either for all deals or for like other snapshots, right, in our task elements. The world is really your oyster, right? This is where you can think about, okay, this is how I need to see the information. But one thing that we definitely want to do here is see my deal-related tasks. So again, I'm going to create a toggle heading, right? And call this deal tasks. And you see also where the strengths of Notion comes in now, right? This is a view and is mostly built around deals. But we can still pull in information from our other databases on the same page if they have any relevance in this context. And this is also the big advantage of using dashboards over just, working directly in the deals database, because you can show all these things in context. So let's create a new link view of database. Let's pull in our VC tasks. Perfect. Let's pull in my tasks to start with. And then after we've hidden this, I want to take it now one step further, and I want to say, okay, here on this filter, I only want to show things that have a deal, right? So a deal is not empty. So it doesn't show me all the tasks, but just my tasks that have specifically to do with the deal workflows. And we see, right, our two newly created tasks, they pop up here immediately. Right, I can check them off. We can do the trick again where we maybe want to show this as a checkbox at the very front of the database to make it look more like a to-do list. And we have now this very quick way, right, on my deal flow management page to sort of like claim new deals, right? Let's also say I want to work on this one. It will disappear here. It will create a new task for me down here. I can check off these tasks and start, managing my workflow like this. One more example. We might also want to see our deal-related meetings here. So again, let's type /h2 toggle heading, right? Deal meetings. In this case, create a linked view of our VC meetings. It's not yes, VC meetings. Yes, pull that in. See what we want to see. Maybe we want to see here only my meetings, or actually all, probably in this case now all meetings, right? And then we can hide this database title. I don't think we have a relation here actually to meetings yet. Yes, we only have it to projects. And here we can also quickly swap this out for the correct icon. But again, no worries, right? Whenever we notice that our database backend that we built is not complete yet, we can simply update it. So let's hide this here for a moment. Click on plus, add this new relation. And again, very important concept. If you add new properties, right, even if you do it through a linked view, it will also appear in the main database. It will appear everywhere. So we can just go in here and say, okay, give me a relation to deals, right? Two-way relation, meetings, perfect. Add this relation, make sure we have this correctly assigned with the rocket. And then here can add our filter, right? Add and show me only entries where deals, again, is not empty. Now we have in here, right, our entries. We could also, if we wanted to, right, adjust our automation here for this newly sourced deals. So it doesn't just create a task for us, right, to review this, but we could also maybe already have it add a meeting, right, maybe a week from now for us to go in and talk about this. Let me show you how this would work, right? Let's go to newly sourced deals. Let's update our button here, go to the automation and say, okay, after we've added this task, let's also add a page to VC meetings. The name is like, review for, and then again we type add, right? And we say, okay, let's review the page where it triggered from. In terms of the properties, let's make sure attendees the external ones. We don't need it there, but the internal one, that's the one I wanted. Let's make sure we add the person who clicked right to this meeting, and the other ones can be then manually invited. But of course, if you always want to invite the same people to your meetings, you can do that. And then what we also want to do is we want to make sure the meeting date is sort of like X days in the future. We can do this by clicking on here, say custom formula, and then we can say, okay, date triggered. We can say date add. And let's say we want to have this 7 days after we initially looked at it, right? So 7 days, you can always reschedule it, but we have sort of something already in the calendar. Click on save, click on save. And of course we need to make sure we connect it to this deal. So deals connected to this page. Perfect. And right then if we would practice this again, we click on here for another one, claim this deal. We see now that we also set up a meeting besides having this automated task. And it's in there. And then if we wanted to have this as a calendar, right, we can just click in there and display this instead on our calendar view so we know when each meeting is coming up. Our front end is taking shape, and now there's just one last thing that I want to walk you through before we go to the automation part of this video. And that is building a simple company wiki. Now we're just going to follow our pattern here, right? So we're going to get another line, add it here, and add another page. And we're going to call this our company wiki. And then we're going to build this out. Now, the biggest mistake that people make when using Notion for the first time and building out these sort of knowledge bases is what Ben Borowski likes to call the Craigslist effect, where you basically just go ahead and you create a bunch of pages here, right? So you might have your mission, you might have your handbook, you might have to, like your vacation policy, and so on and so on. All these different entries, you turn them into pages, and then you kind of call it a day. And this is okay if you want to use Notion just as a notebook, but you're missing out on so much of the power of it. Instead, what you want to do, right, instead of just creating them as nested pages, is you want to go ahead and do what we did in the beginning of this video, right? In our backend, set up a database for your documents. And then whenever you create any kind of page, that contains knowledge, it should live in this docs database, right? So for example, our firm history, right, expense policies, everything should be in here. Because that way you can have an owner, right, a clear person who's responsible for it. You can have a type, you can have a status, you can have sort of a verification, when was this last reviewed, and so on, right? All the things that databases allow you to do, which is what sets Notion really apart from the rest. But of course, this is not the best way to then go through documents and read them. So you can combine the best of both worlds though, by having them stored here, and then on your company homepage, right? This is then where you can go ahead and say, okay, here's how I want to design this so for easier access. There are a bunch of ways to do this, right? So one thing that we could do is we can just start with a call out, on this page, you will find the most important documents for, our VC firm, something like this, right? Just like a small intro paragraph. And then what typically looks good is if you add like a 2-column layout there, and then you could start mentioning your documents. Now, this is true for sort of like everything that you want to have shown there always, right? When it comes to wiki pages, I like to distinguish between static content and dynamic one. Static one is the one that you want to always show. So for example, right, we could say something like, our firm, and then there might be another heading in this other column, right? Sort of like operational guides. And then below that, we can, if we wanted to, right, we could add a little bit of dividers just for some nice visual clarity. And then here, by pressing the add key, we can now reference the documents that we have in our other database. So, right, our mission statement, let's see what, I'm not entirely sure what the name for that is, mission and values, yep, something there, perfect. Here, firm mission statement and core values, right, we can link to that. We could link to our investment thesis and strategy framework, can link to pretty much the primacy, right? All the documents that we have in our database, they can be linked here just the same way. And except for like this tiny little arrow, right, everything works the same, just that the click into this document brings you actually right into the correct document in the database. Need to add navigation here as well, right, so that we can quickly jump back to our company wiki page, but you get the gist. And the same for operational guides, right? So here, right, our employee handbook can be added there. Employee handbook, we have a lot of employee handbooks. Let's just link any of them. Our investment process, all the documents that we've created here. And that way, right, you can sort of like control, okay, these are the documents that I always want to show there for people. And then if we want to go to the next line, right, we can continue doing this. Now, one tip is that even better if you have this 2-column layout and these categories, is to instead of just keep writing within the same column, to then take a line, right, and wait for it to be blue along the whole line. And then here, right, if we just like would add a divider, we see again we're in a full line space. So what we want to do then is add here another 2 columns, right, for sort of like the next thing, right, maybe legal and compliance. And then on the other side, we could add like templates and resources, and so on, right? You get a gist, and then add the documents. I'm going to add the other ones in a second, but before I do that, I just want to compare this static approach to the dynamic approach that I just mentioned. Dynamic means that instead of like mentioning these pages individually, we're getting always the latest documents directly from the database. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say we type here /create link view of database, and we get our VC docs database. This is now our database here, right? And we can hide the title as usually. And now what we could say, so for example, let's say we always want to see our latest due diligence documents, right? What we can do is we can now add a filter, advanced filter. Say, where the type, I think this, right, is due diligence. Then we can add another sort and say, okay, please do this based on date created, right, or last edited. For date created, we of course need to still add it to this database. So click on plus, search for created time, right, hide it in the view, we don't need to see it. And then add our sort here to this to make sure we always have the latest due diligence documents at the top. For a very clean view, you can then swap this to a list view, right, through the layout section. And then in the list view, right, what we could then do is also sort of like just, if we want to remove this, right, just have our list here, maybe like with the arrow pointing down. We can also then hide the section if we want to. And then we have this like very clean rundown of our latest due diligences. And we can show more information if we want to, right? We could go on settings and, for example, say, okay, please show me, right, if it's a due diligence, that the deal that it belongs to. We don't have that link set up yet, right? We would set it up just the same way that we link it to project otherwise. Otherwise, we could also show, for example, the owner, right? Whatever information it is that we want to display here, we can still have it here. And the beauty of this approach is now, right, that this updates automatically, right? So unlike these documents, we need to sort of, whenever there's a new one that we want to add to this list, we need to add this through the add key. Here, it will always show us, right, our latest due diligence list. And that's how you want to think about these knowledge pages, right? You want to think about, okay, what is the core information that we need to sort of pin, right, and have front and center on this page, like our mission statement, right, or the employee handbook. Those pages won't change all the time. But then what are documents that we sort of like just churn out and produce a lot of, and we want to always see sort of the latest there? And that's where you then want to use the database view. And by combining both of these things, right, you get the best of both worlds. You can build these static company wiki pages that point people to whatever they need, and at the same time make sure that the most recent information automatically flows in it. All right, with the Notion setup out of the way, let's take a look now at how we can use smart automations to supercharge your work. If we zoom out a bit, what we've basically done so far is help you organize the meta work in your VC firm. Meta work is everything, right, that happens so that you can actually do your job. It's the project management part, right? It's the coordination in a team. And the well-designed Notion system is really, really good at helping make this meta work easier. But one thing that Notion on its own can't do is help you with your actual work, right? Actually taking items off your to-do list and doing them for you. This is where we need to add automations. So the good Notion system, that's our foundation to help with meta work. And then automations on top of that actually free you up from certain tasks on your to-do list. Here's a look of two of my favorite workflows for PCs. There are two workflows that I want to take a look at for this automation section. One of them has to do with sort of how does information get into Notion in the beginning on autopilot, right? Assuming you will get a lot of emails, right, with pitches, let's make sure that whenever a pitch comes in, we extract the data from that and we automatically add that to Notion as, you know, an opportunity with all the information that we have from them, plus add that then to our, you know, workflow page that we had for the deal flow management so that then people can claim it, right, and continue working with it. That's number one. That looks at this external, how to get data into Notion. And then the second workflow exemplifies how we can automate information flow within Notion, right? Let's say something starts as a company entry in our CRM, and at some point we want to transform it into a deal. And then if the deal closes, ideally, right, it would transform into a portfolio company. All of these things should should not require you to, copy paste information from left to right. So those are the two workflows that we will take a look at here. Let's start with the second one actually, because it's a bit easier to visualize and to set it up. I just created a workflow demo page, right? And on this page, I pulled in linked views of the 3 databases that we work with, right? Through which the data is supposed to flow, just to make it a bit easier to follow along. Starting on companies, right? What is the quickest way to turn our company into a deal? Of course, we could go in, right? We could say new page, Apple Inc., right? And then link it to there. But again, that is manual work that really doesn't have to happen. Instead, let's add a button here, right? And let's call this transform to deal, right? Or to deal, whatever it is that you want. And then let's make this a button. Now, when we click this button, what we want to happen, right, is let's go and edit automation. And then here on the click, we want to create a new record in deals. So first action, add page to, and then look for our deals database. In terms of the name, we don't want this untitled, but we want this to be the same name as the company name. So what we're going to do is we can click into this formula option, right, and then map it, or we can simply type add, and that also gives us the option to, pull from the page that we mentioned. And we don't want to pull the link, right? So if we do this one, we would actually link to the entry, but we just want the text from it. So we go on this page at the top, and then we're going to pull in the name. Perfect. Then next, what else do we need to edit? Well, we need to make sure that we automatically connect this to the company, right? We want to have the company connected as well. So let's click on company. And here, let's say, okay, from company, I want to set this to the page on which we clicked, right? Making sure that the deal is linked there. And you can see, right, if there's any other information that you want to carry over, but for the most part, that won't be the case probably, because, right, the way our databases are built is that they have different kinds of information. The company database has the general information about the company, the deal one, the deal specific. So most of the information we won't need to actually carry over through that. But of course, we can take a look, right? One other example, if we wanted to link contacts individually to a deal as well, then we could do that. We could carry over just the contacts from the other one. Might also be interesting, right? Maybe sometimes the contacts for the company in general are different than the contacts for the deal, but we can sort of start with that. And the way we would do this is we would simply say, okay, on contact, what I want to carry over is this time a custom formula from the, let me move myself out of the way, from the page where we clicked, right? We want to get the contacts. And that together, right? And then we can flatten this if we want. And we can click on save. And this will now move over the contacts from one entry to another. That's pretty much it. In this case, we can still think about whether we want to open it. In the site tab, again, I would recommend that this is sort of like your default when creating new entries, just so that people get a little bit of a feedback, right, for the actions. So let's say, okay, open page, make sure we open our newly added page in site peek. And last but not least, if you don't want people to accidentally click this button, right, what you can do is actually add a confirmation step. So we can add this, you want to drag it to the very top, right, so that triggers first. And then we can just say, you are about to create a deal for this company. Then continue or cancel, right? And we can click on save. And now if I hit this button, right, it asks me, well, do I want to do this? I will say yes. And then you see in a second, we have our new deal for Apple Inc. popping up here, right? The owner is already set for me. It's linked to the company. It will pull over the contacts that we have from the other one, right? And opens it here on the side for me to fill out any other information that I would want about that deal. And the same would be true, right? If we then want to build a system to make sure that when the deal is closed won, it is added to the portfolio. In this case, we can actually have a different trigger if we want to. We can, of course, use a button to say, okay, if I click on here, set this deal to 1 and move it over, but I just want to show you a different approach. This time, what we're going to do is we're just going to work on this option, right? So basically, when something is set to closing, we want to add it to our portfolio. To do that, we're going to click on this flash option, and we're going to say, give this again a name, right? And this name will be add one deal to portfolio. In this case, we need to define the trigger, right? With button clicks, it's obvious when the button is clicked. Here we need to tell Notion when should this run. We want to say, please run whenever our status property, where is it? Deal stage is set to closing. When that is the case, what I want you to do is I want you to go in and again, add a page to my portfolio, to my portfolio database. I want to carry over the name, right? So for the name, we grab from the trigger page the actual deal name. I want to add also a few of the other properties, right? I probably want to make sure the owner gets carried over if we wanted to. So this should be carried over. The fund we probably want to carry over, right? So let's go to fund. This is again a relation. So you know the drill of how this works. We go to custom formula and we say trigger page. So the deal where it comes from, dot fund flat, and then push that over to our other entry. Then we can add whatever else we want to carry over as well, right? And then when we're ready, we can click on enable. And then as soon as we have something here, and let's say we have this Apple Inc., right? And we can actually link this to a fund maybe. We're looking at this for our second fund. And then when we move now the deal stage from sourced to closing, in a moment, we should be having, a new entry in our portfolio pop up down here. There it is, right? Apple Inc. active. It should already be linked to the correct fund. Perfect. And through this workflow, right, you can make sure that information flows automatically between your database and no one in the company has to copy paste something ever again. For the second automation, we need to actually venture outside of Notion because we need the help of a third-party automation tool to really nail this. The one that I'm going to use here is called relay.app, which is an amazing automation tool that makes it really, really easy to build powerful workflows together with AI. I've got the link for that down below in the description, but you can of course also use any other typical tool, right? N8n, make.com, they will all work for this approach. Now, if you create a new relay account and then create a new scenario, this is what you will see. It's your workflow builder. And the first thing we will of course do is give this a name, right? So let's say extract deal data from pitches, something like this. Could also give this an icon, right? Maybe a megaphone because it's a pitch, perfect. And then can click out of this. The first thing we then need to do is to decide when should this workflow run, right? When do you need to extract data? And probably you will get a lot of emails, right? A lot of inbound messages around all the cool things that you might want to have a look at. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a trigger, and your two options are pretty much either a mail hook or connecting Gmail directly. Now you can connect Gmail directly if you either have a specific inbox, right? Where you say, okay, we sort of have pitches at BC and everyone sends messages there, or if you have set up specific rules. However, in the beginning, I think it's probably easiest for you to also keep a bit more control over the process to use the mail hook step. Basically, what this does is it will give you a unique email address that you can forward any pitch to. And then basically everything that gets forwarded to this address will be processed by this automation. Again, you can later create a bit more of an elegant solution, but it's a great starting point. So let's do this here. Let's select mail hook. And you see that relay gives us this unique address. I'm going to copy this in a second, right? I click on done for a moment. And then I will actually send a test email with some sample data to this address, just so we can have something to work with. Next, it's time to process that email. So we're going to click on plus, and we're going to ask AI to analyze the information here, right? So we will use the AI step. And here you see you have a bunch of, sort of pre-classified prompts. And one of them is extract, right? Get structured data from email transcripts and more. This is probably the easiest one to go for, but of course you can also just write your own custom prompt and instruct it what to do. But in this case, extract is exactly what we want to do, so we're going to go with that option. It asks us what we want to extract from that email that we forwarded, right? That's perfect. And then we can click on next. And here we see we have already this prompt sort of like pre-created for us with please extract the following details from the attached email, right? And of course, invoice due date, amount, and vendor name is not what we're looking for, but we now just think about, okay, what is the key information we need? Probably the key information, right, that we're tracking in our Notion database that we want from here. So what we want from here, right, is the deal name. We want the target investment. We want the revenue. What else do we have? We want the industry, the business model, and then sort of like maybe just like what else? Let's start with that, right? You can of course adjust it to what you need, but pretty good start. And you see on the side here, right? The AI from Relay will automatically figure out, okay, these are sort of the fields that I'm supposed to extract. And you could click on them, right? You can change them. You can also like turn this off and define the output yourself. But usually this is a pretty good starting point. One thing to note is if you can click on any, right, and you can sort of like mark it as required. That's sometimes quite helpful. You can also click on it to say, okay, this actually should be not, like text, but a number output. But in this case, right, let's actually start with something like this. I think in our Notion system, we have it also formatted as text. Let me just quickly double check. Right, here's our thing. Actually, don't know, the target investment and revenue both would also be numbers. So we need to make sure that that is clear in the system. So let's click on revenue, right, and make sure that this is actually a number, save. And also for target investment, this is also a number, and click on save. And yeah, that looks good, right? Text, this is all pretty decent. So let's click on the test this step option. Now, test currently, we need to select values above to do this. We have our email in here. We need to like have it run once from the sample one, and then we can see how the sample response would look like. In order to test this, we would usually start test run, but with main hooks, they work a bit differently. Currently in Relay, when you watch it might be different. So you can click it, right, see whether it works. For me, it tells me I just need to turn it on. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to see start manually, right? So same message, we need to just wait for something to arrive. So I'm going to go off, quickly send myself an email, and then we should be able in the runs tab, right, to see what's happening. And then after a few moments, right, we see this first run appear, and we can just investigate and see what happened. So we got an email, right, and we can sort of just see what the text was if we care about it. And then we can check our AR output, right, to see, okay, what was extracted, deal name, Series B investment opportunity, Cursor AI. Okay, nice, Cursor's pitching us, perfect. Target investment revenue, both extracted as numbers, right? We have the industry, we have the business model, and yeah, that's pretty much what we're looking for, right? Of course, now at this point, if there's something that we want to modify, we can, right? We can go back into our prompt and make sure it is adjusted. So for example, currently, I feel like in my deal database, I just want the actual company name as a deal name. So let's go back to the AI, right? Explain that to it, but otherwise you get the gist, right, of how this works. So let's give some additional instructions. For the deal name, make sure to only extract the target company name. Don't add any other qualifiers like Series A or similar, right? And then of course, right, that the information that it is a Series B opportunity, we would also want to extract this. We want to have our specific properties for that in Notion, but the process would be exactly the same as for the other properties. So probably no need to specifically walk through there. Just one last note, you can always swap out the model that you use, right? That's one of the nice things about Relay. You noticed I didn't have to set up an API here. So by default, you get access to a bunch of different models here, right? And you can, so for example, say, okay, actually, this is a very simple one, right? So Gemini Flash is probably more than enough. So I'm actually going to swap to this just to make it a bit cheaper to run these workflows. And then I'm going to click on done. Now, the next step that has to happen after that, of course, is we need to add that information to Notion, right? So let's click on plus and let's search for Notion and then add the option here, right? Add page to database. Here, we're going to select then our database from the deals. We need to make sure it is shared with Relay, right? If you sign up with Relay for the first time, it will ask you, okay, what database should have access to? You see I have a bunch of it shared already, but if your specific database isn't shared yet, we need to make sure that it is. So I'm going to click into deals, right, on my deals database. And then here, I will go on the 3 dots on top right corner, connections. And then here, I will add now Relay. This should be our correct one, right? We have a bunch of connections, as you can see. And then if I head back over here and wait a moment, we should be able to see deals. Yeah, there they are, they pop up. Perfect. And now we can map whatever information we want from this database, right, to, from our previous step to the database. So what I want to say is, right, I want to click on add a field. I want to say, okay, in terms of the deal's name, I would like to map the value from the previous AI step, the deal name. In terms of revenue, I would like to, again, right, extract the AI, the revenue. In terms of the target investment, I would like to map the target investment. In terms of what else do we have? But I think we had, did we have the industry? Let's see. In terms of the industry, do we have, no, we do actually have the industry. And it tells me now that there might be an error, the type, right? Because in Notion, industry is a select property, not a pure text one, but it's fine. The system will be able to properly match this, so you can ignore this at this point. And right, any other properties that we would want to map over would work the same. We could even upload files if we wanted to, right? If we get attachments from our emails, we could go over those attachments and also upload them. But for now, let's just see whether this whole workflow looks like, right? I think we can't test it here yet because of the main look limitation. But so I'm just going to click on Done instead. I'm going to click on Publish, and then I'm going to send myself another email, right, to see whether it ends up in Notion. And we see our next run was successful as well. If we go then over to Notion, right, to our deal flow management page where this whole workflow plugs in now, we see also under newly sourced deals, we have now cursor, right? We see the industry, we see the revenue, and we have then, if you had mapped other fields like the business model, right, that would come in as well. If you would explain to the AI in our prompt, right, what is our thesis and please select the correct one, it could do that just as well. And you see now how these things tie together. I have it now here, right? I could start to claim this deal, right? Add it to my workflow, create some default tasks. We could even take it one step further, right? You could have a whole list of tasks that always need to happen, right? When a new deal comes in, and you could say, okay, when this deal is created, right, please also create these 7 tasks and add them to the to-do list. You could create the contact automatically and connect it here, right? Anything is possible from this position where you have your structured data in Notion, and then you layer these kinds of automations on top that help you take that information and add it directly to the system. So yeah, you don't have to do this manually anymore. Congratulations! You're now at a point where you've built a fully functioning operating system in Notion and layered some really cool automations on top. Again, if you need help with any of this or with taking it now to the next level, you know where to find me. And the same goes, of course, if you would like to roll out these kind of systems for your portfolio companies and help them achieve operational excellence. And if you want to continue now your Notion journey and really bring things to the next level, well, then check this video out next. It's a complete Notion formula and automation masterclass that will really help you master the advanced nuances of the system. Just click here and I will see you in a few seconds.